Session today. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. Wrestling
Mayor Bynum,
George Stewart,
Wayne Parker,
Isaac Paxman.
and we are missing Councilman Sewell. He's not here right now. Hopefully he will be coming.
The mayor will be here very soon as well.
Thank you. Mr. McGinn has been invited to give the opening prayers. Thank you, Gary.
our Father in heaven, we're grateful this afternoon that we can meet together to discuss those items that are of importance to the city. We ask thy blessing upon us that we'll be able to have good and full discussion and have unanimity of understanding. Father, we'd ask a blessing upon those employees that work in the field, that they be watched over and be able to return home safely to their families. We also ask a blessing upon the residents of this city. And we pray for these things in Christ's name. Amen.
We have an agenda, 5 items on it, and we'll turn the time over to Cliff Stratton for the first item, a review and discussion of 2013. And we have Mayor Kapuski and Mr. Sewell here. Thank you.
Kelsey, you'll have to do the switching. All right, Council. It's good to be here. It's good to have you here and have this discussion. Today we're going to focus on essentially 4 main items. We're going to just go over the Vision 2030 goals and objectives. We're going to go over, talk about outcomes and that email I sent out about the big idea. We're going to work on some priorities, and near the end of the meeting we're going to have a presentation discussion with John Borgett and Dustin Graybaugh about the budget process this year. So we'll hopefully move that forward. So I really don't need to give you a history of 2030. Back about, what year is it, 17? Back about 7, 8, 9 years ago, Mayor Curtis and many people in the public and the council that day worked on the 2030 to identify a vision for the city going out to 2030. Next slide. These are the values and things that the city considers to be important. Safe, desirable neighborhoods, vibrant economy, fiscally responsible government, and lifelong education. Next one. These are the core values that are summarized within 2030. Family, safe city, community, faith, education, business, responsible government, healthy environment, and living. This comes straight out of the Vision 2030 document, but also it's what shows up in the budget every year. Next one. These are the 4 values that the council, this comes again from 2030, but these are the 4 values that were encapsulated by the council in 2016 when you adopted your last set of priorities, the 9 priorities that we've been working on the last 2 years. You can read that. Next one. All right, so section 1 of the priorities, of course, is, of the 2030 is family neighborhoods. And if you'll read through, I'm not going to read all of this, but the goals that we've identified, and I've given you a copy of it, I believe. You should have a copy in front of you. Did that get distributed, Elizabeth?
Yes. Goals, yeah.
Okay. So you have that, so you can flip throughout the meeting. Oh, there we go. Okay. So improve neighborhood interconnectivity, capitalize on local resources, help neighborhoods preserve their identities, empower neighborhoods, encourage owner occupancy or long-term residency, maintain and improve the physical appearance of neighborhoods, and help neighborhoods become well-informed and educated on city issues. Land use and growth, protect existing owner-occupied housing in neighborhoods and encourage an increased percentage of owner-occupied or long-term residency. Identify opportunities for neighborhood amenities, disperse the increase in demand for affordable housing, prioritize areas within the city for economic development, facilitate environmentally sensitive land use and development, promote safety through urban design, establish reasonable community-based design review standards. Recreation and parks, establish a system of attractive parks and rec facilities, augment the general plan for pedestrian paths, trails, etc., provide enhanced opportunities for the arts, entertainment, and museums, examine the golf course, its operations, benefit of the community, and consider potential opportunities, establish a recreational beach and other site improvements near the lake, operates a world-class municipal recreation center, obtain ongoing revenue for the funding of these things. Section 4 is natural resources. There's a whole bunch of goals here. Work with other organizations to protect, preserve, and restore the natural resources of the mountains, canyons, foothills, wetlands, etc. Ensure that Provo rivers are year-round stream with protected flows. We also see it as a resource for recreation. Maintain the high quality of our groundwater. Improve our air quality. Recognize that the Utah Lake is a focal point for our natural resources systems and protect that. Improve energy efficiency in Provo. Work with UMPA to continue long-term electrical energy resources that are affordable, renewable, and stable, and require clean business and industry. Heritage. Preserve structures and districts with unique histories or architecture. Preserve historic or unique cultural resources. Raise awareness of local history, culture, and historic sites. Prosperity, this is economic development. Provo will partner with the business community for greater political participation, as well as creating, promoting, and growing business. Provo is a leader in entrepreneurial support and a prominent place to start and grow a business. Provo will continue a robust business retention and expansion program. Provo will also focus on increasing our airport business. We'll maintain good transportation routes. We'll encourage the development of various types of housing stock. We'll continue to require high-quality commercial developments. We'll develop business facilities and locations, and we'll promote the Central Business District. 7, public and nonprofit partnerships. Employ volunteerism. Identify nonprofit agency partnerships that align with our vision. Ensure that residents are aware of public government and nonprofit agencies, the assistance they provide, and volunteer service opportunities. In other words, connect with our service organizations in the city. Safety, create and maintain safe neighborhoods. A goal here of ranking the 95th percentile for lowest crime. Respond to and exceed national standards for emergency situations. Continue to support safety, education, and promotion. And utilize technology to improve efficiency for the delivery of safety, services, and prevention. Transportation and mobility. Promote connectivity for all modes of transportation. Ensure proper maintenance of our transportation in Provo. Encourage utilization of our street standards and design tools, including complete street design. Promote easier navigation with appropriate signage and education. I think we call that wayfinding. And enhance the downtown as a destination. 10, diversity and unity. Respond to demographic shifts by educating the community on the various groups that live here. Bridge gaps of misunderstanding by good communication. Greater attention to meeting the needs of the less advantaged. Provide growth opportunities for seniors. Embrace opportunities to appreciate and learn about the diversity of the people and cultures around us. And 11 is governance. Make our government transparent and accessible. Create balanced and sustainable financial plans and budgets. Share information the best way we can. Promote strategies for good employees in the Provo. And I think this one also means for the city employees. Develop and adopt best practices in city engagement and encourage civility in our community discourse. All right, So I read through it because I know you can read, and I just wanted to summarize, but those are the things that we identified way back in 2010 as things, as worthy goals and objectives. And I know in the past 7, 8, 9 years, the city has been working towards many of those things and has accomplished in whole or in part many of them. So where do we go? To go from vision, I call this from vision to priorities. Vision is an act or power of imagination. A priority is something that merits our attention before competing alternatives. And one of the things as you go through the opportunities and the priorities that you're considering is that there's lots of alternatives to focus on. Some of them are really smaller to do, some of them are big things that are going to take ambitious action. The question for you, council, and for the administration is, what do you want to accomplish over the next 2 years as this body? And I know we're focused on the next 2 years, but we're really focused in the long term. The 2 years that we're focused on right now is the term that exists with this body as it's presently constituted. Found these quotes. Setting priorities is challenging, but it's absolutely necessary when there are so many competing demands for your time. It'll help you focus, plan your time effectively, and ensure you're achieving the bigger goals you set out for yourself from the start. You know, I've heard different stories about council's priorities over the years, but one of the things I think that helped us to really focus on in the last 2 years was when we put them on paper and committed them and put them up on the wall in the council office so that we could see them every day and be focused on trying to accomplish them, and we're going to continue to do that. I like this one. This comes from Martian Craft, which I assume is a game, but it says you don't need to fix every bug, you just need to fix the right bugs. And in terms of how to accomplish it, make a list, assess the value of it, be honest about it, be flexible about your list, and then cut the cord. And I think that is, don't hold back on trying to accomplish things. So we're going to move into this idea of outcomes. At leadership last week, there was a discussion with the administration. Mayor Kafusi and Wayne Parker and Isaac were in there, and we talked about this idea of a big idea, this idea of what outcomes do we want to move toward if we're going to do budgeting for outcomes. And the idea was to find something that's big that we can focus on and let that be the outcome that we try and measure on a perhaps on a small scale, but a larger problem that we can bring ideas to bear on in our efforts to accomplish. So last week we sent out an email that kind of outlined what a big idea is, and creates an emotional connection. It reimagines the way we think or act. It has value. It's hopefully meaningful to us. It should connect with people. It's something that, you know, it's kind of one of those aha things that inspires people, but it's also reachable, but forces us to stretch. And so we can talk about various ideas. So the question is, what problem can we solve, and or what ideal can we achieve for the city? And so the assignment was, I sent an email out to council and council staff, and Wayne sent an email out to the administration and to the all the department heads, and basically asked to come up with some ideas. And so we wanted to take some time and investigate those. But before we do, Wayne's got a video he wanted to share with us, and you want to introduce that and talk to us?
Yeah, let me do that. So I think many of you have read the Jim Collins book, Good to Great, but there was actually a book before that Jim Collins wrote that talked about what it's been referred to in the industry as a BHAG, which is a big, hairy, audacious goal. And the idea of the BHAG is to identify something that galvanizes the organization, gets us focused on something that's really important, and tends to bridge divides, eliminate silos, force us to think really hard about what's really important. And so as we've talked about outcomes the last couple of weeks in both the budget committee and with council leadership, we thought maybe sharing a good example of a city that has tried to tackle this kind of issue would be useful. And so the budget committee looked some time ago at at something that's been done in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that we thought maybe it'd be worth sharing a TED Talk by the mayor of Tulsa, Mayor Bynum, who has presented at the Utah League of Cities once, and also was actually on a phone call with the Budget Committee a couple of months ago to talk about this concept of how you galvanize and unite a city in an attempt to solve a problem. And so I think maybe we'll just go ahead and play the TED Talk. It's not very long, about 9 or 10 minutes, if I recall, maybe a little bit longer than that. But I think it's worth investing a few minutes to at least look at an example of how one city tackled an almost unsolvable problem and began to solve it. So we, about 13 minutes it looks like. So if we can go ahead and just play that, and then Cliff and I will kind of walk through a discussion about where we go from here. So the TED Talk was a little short on specifics, but let me maybe fill in the gaps just a little bit. So when you talk to Mayor Bynum about his experience so far in Tulsa, he'll tell you a couple of things. One is that it is not just the city who addresses issues of life expectancy in this particular neighborhood. It is a pooling together of resources, and so it's the city, it's the nonprofits, it's the school district, it's the county health department. You know, as they started looking at the root causes of this change in, I've never had music accompany my presentation before.
We're expecting something great now.
Yeah, there you go. But the entire community got together. As they looked at the causes and again got to the data points, there were a number of factors that seemed to lead to the challenges they were facing in this neighborhood. As he suggested, there were socioeconomic issues around that. There were public health issues. There was gang violence. There was a predominance of single-parent families. There were a lot of Title I schools and low test scores. I mean, there were a whole lot of things that were sort of combining to suggest that that kids born in that neighborhood would live 11 years less than kids born in any other neighborhood in Tulsa. And so they united the effort around that. Now, as you can tell, this TED Talk was given just about a year ago. So they're not very far into their process, but they are measuring data. They are looking at those key indicators and how they change month by month and quarter by quarter as they go. And I have total confidence that they're going to make a difference. They're going to shrink the gap. Now, whether they fully close the gap, is, I guess, yet to be determined. But the idea of trying to identify one unifying theme, an objective that can be visualized, visioned, measured, tracked. And as Mayor Bynum suggested, he said, well, one thing, for example, that they've done is they've combined funding sources to put more social workers in the schools. He said, now that one has some marginal kind of benefits so far. So he said, we're kind of letting the process develop out, but he said it's our full intent that if social workers in the school don't move the needle, we'll pull the funding, we'll send those social workers to work somewhere else, and we'll take that funding and apply it to something that is working. And that could be gang interdiction, or it could be maternal health education, or whatever those indicators are. He said it's fully our intent to figure this out and to do it by gathering data and then holding people accountable for the use of the resources. So I kind of came away from the league presentation, the TED Talk, and subsequent discussions with folks in Tulsa about what they're doing there. And so as we kind of shared this concept with the Budget Committee and council leadership, the question then became, well, what's our big idea? What's our big goal? What really moves the needle? And so again, that was kind of the conversation that was destined for today. And as I think Mayor and Gary Winterton, as they talked, kind of said, well, we'll come up with 3, and you guys come up with 3, and let's see if anything resonates or if there's some commonalities, and just have a good discussion around what is the really big idea that truly moves the needle in a meaningful way in Provo. And so that's kind of the purpose for at least part 1 of today's discussion at the retreat. So any other thoughts, Mayor Isaac, that you'd like to share? So that was kind of our thinking, so.
So we received a number of suggestions, and my thinking is, and I think it's in line with David Harding's, and that is to let the people who had the ideas pitch them, and take 90 seconds or so and just talk about the ideas that you had. Let me pull one up that I think falls in the same line, but it's probably bigger than we can handle right now, but it's an idea. And Kelsey, can you pull up that video?
Yes. This one?
That one. So this comes from a presentation we had at the ICMA conference last fall at a BYU MPA dinner, and this again may be bigger, but we have homeless problems in the city, and this is just one solution, but I thought it was creative. It's about 5 minutes. Again, it's just one idea. We had other ideas that were suggested in here. Larry, when we were talking about it after the budget committee last week, he has a few ideas that we could look at. Did you want to talk about any of the ideas that you had? Okay. Okay. George Hanley had an idea. Dave Sewell had an idea. A couple ideas that came up in the priorities had to do around infrastructure and then of course affordable housing. And I've given you some explanation on those, but it might be worth having Dave Sewell and George Hanley pitch their ideas.
Well, I thought of the Provo River one just because of the language you were using in your description of what a big idea was. I mean, I think a lot of the infrastructure issues that were raised by other city council members are really important. Dave Connect mentioned the water infrastructure in the city, I think, is a pretty urgent matter. The convention center, I think, is a pretty urgent matter. But as far as like an idea that captures the public's attention, I just thought of that as something that could conceivably be that kind of project. It's something that everybody cares a lot about. I mean, there's sort of two ends of the Provo River that right now seem to have people's attention, and one is always the Provo River Trail in the canyon. I mean, that's an extraordinarily popular area in the city. It's an extremely valuable place. I mean, I'm a heavy user of that as much as most anybody in the city. And it is a community gathering place. It's a place of solace. It's a place of recreation. It's a place of family gathering. You've got wonderful parks along the trail, but then there's sort of this blank space between the canyon and then the lake, and as you get down closer to the lake, it becomes a little bit more of that kind of place. Of course, with the Delta Restoration Project, there's some real opportunity to make it even more of a gathering place, an educational place that teaches the community about the lake, about the history associated with the lake and the river. But through the middle of the city, it's just kind of an afterthought, and it just passes by. And I don't know if you've been involved in cleanup projects along the river with, I don't know, Boy Scout troops or whatever, but it's pretty appalling what you pull out of that river. And when I saw the video about the Ogden River project, that kind of grabbed my attention. I think what's exciting about it is that the river actually has, and I've actually done a fair amount of research and writing about the river, and the river actually has a really deep connection to our history. I mean, it has a deep connection to the Native American history of this valley. The whole reason why this valley was attractive to settlers had to do with the river and the lake, and the fish in the river and the lake that provided protein that were not available, resources that were not available up in Salt Lake Valley, for example. But that was also why there was a larger Native American population here prior to the arrival of the Mormon settlers. Anyway, so it's just got this fascinating history that goes way back, and then sort of ends up being central to the foundation of the city, right? The agricultural community starts to irrigate the river and create orchards and so on, and so it ends up playing a really important role in our history, but it's sad that that role has not been fully recognized, as sort of doesn't capture the community's imagination. So in addition to all the aesthetic and recreational values that it has, I think it has an important historical value. So I just thought of it as something that kind of matched those requirements of something that could be really uniting. It could be really helpful in terms of a community building project. It's a feel-good project. It's not naturally divisive, although I'm sure getting into the nitty-gritty about how to make that happen could create some interesting discussions, but hopefully I think the target goal would keep people pretty unified around it. So that's why I proposed it.
And in the video, which we have, but we don't have to show it, but the video talks about the various groups that come together, the business community, the recreation community, the environmental community, and to do a lot of different things with the Ogden River and make it as kind of a central feature of their city. Dave Sewell?
Since we have an example of that close by up in Ogden, I think it might be worth having somebody come down to a work meeting and kind of talk about costs and benefits and kind of their experience with it. My suggestion. So,
Did you want to talk about the convention center idea?
sure, this is just kind of an amalgamation really of several ideas. One is to turn our relationship with the county around and get to the point where we could team up together and get excited about expanding the convention center. Of course, that would require not only solving the current parking problem, but thinking far enough ahead that we would be providing enough parking for an expanded convention center. An expanded convention center would benefit, there'd be mutual benefit from having plenty of hotels, so it got me thinking about the city center and eventual redevelopment of that in some fashion, which might or might not involve moving part of the city center to a different location. If we were able to do that, maybe put another hotel there, and of course some retail and other, make sure there's sufficient parking there. And then as part of all this, solving the downtown parking issue as well, that might involve some form of paid parking, as we were discussing the other day. But I know there's a lot of downtown businesses that are frustrated at the parking situation right now. So if that could be folded into all of that, and then the expanded city center, of course, would help in other areas with police, fire, and having medical facilities and everything else. Haven't really thought it through in much detail, just kind of dreaming as you.
It's just meant to be a high-level pitch for now, but does anybody else on council want to share any ideas that they had?
A couple that I've been thinking about. You hit one for me that I think it's only going to get to become a bigger challenge, and that would be our homeless situation. As things change in north of us, I think that we need to focus on some of those issues and get a lot of community help. I think we have a community that is so service-oriented that if we can somehow focus that vision of service, I think it can make a huge difference as we're going forward, because that problem is coming further south. And that's something that I would like to. I also thinking about the idea of understanding the economics, and maybe this is a vision for I'd like the city to understand the economics of our community, that as we buy a hamburger in Provo, what does it mean to our community, rather than going out to some other place. And I think often if we can catch the vision of what our community is, the value, the things that we have that we can really build on, and then take advantage of those, have the community embrace the idea of shopping. I know that we had an idea of buy local at one time, and I don't know if we can re-emphasize that or start to show developers that we do have a community that wants to support our local group. And I think there's several partners that we could develop a marketing scheme and a marketing plan that would help people to understand that we have what you want in Provo. And when you support Provo, this is what it does for our community. I think we often forget that. Those are two things that I thought.
Yeah, so I gave you a list of priorities, not necessarily in that order, although I tried to put first things first. And before I talk about the big idea, I would like to say that I was interested in seeing the other lists that were generated, and took particular note of a couple of them. Dave and I went to lunch, Dave Harding and I went to lunch, and I asked him about some of his, and I noticed on Dave Sewell's he added emergency preparedness, be prepared to plan and appropriate resources for when disaster strikes. And I'm going, why didn't I put that one down? I'm the emergency preparedness coordinator for our state. And we just had somebody push a button in Hawaii that highlighted all of that. But getting back to the big idea, I guess I'm just kind of practical. My job keeps me real grounded, and so I like fixing the things that are broken and doing first things first, and then I go on vacation and put the icing on the cake when everything else is in order, which means I never go on vacation, right? But if it's one thing for us to dream big, it's another to go out and ask the residents, what's your dream, or what do you think we should all coalesce and try to solve? I don't want to necessarily come up with an idea and try to sell it to them. I'd love to hear if there's a groundswell of, gee, there's something we really would like fixed. And when you talk about shopping local, that's one thing that I remember from the campaign trail was, why can't I shop local? I can't buy my groceries in Provo. And of course our study found that was our #1 leakage of sales tax, groceries, and maybe pharmaceuticals in addition to that. And we're now losing Allen's. We don't have any on the west side, so that is just a huge priority for the city financially, but also on a practical basis. I get concerned when I hear long-term, 20-year plus residents say, you know, that I've just watched my neighborhood change over the years, and it's to the point where I just have to move. I can't take it anymore. That's very concerning. So those are the things that just weigh on my mind. And if there's, again, something that is really important to the public, let's find out what it is and pursue that.
So the administration, Mayor, do you have some ideas?
Yeah, so we,
Sorry.
oh,
Dave
go
Harding
ahead.
wanted to.
Go ahead, Dave. No.
Is that okay, just maybe
Yeah,
before
no,
the
you go ahead.
transition? I've had some similar thoughts to Mr. Connect. On a lot of this, I think my take may be a little bit different though, because I almost feel like it's time to take a vacation, in your analogy, meaning, you know, metric after metric, list after list, we're coming out, best place to live, best place to retire, best place to go to school, best, all of these bests. And I really think we're at a remarkable point in the history of the city where, we've put out a lot of the fires. We made it through the Great Recession fairly well. We've I'm drawing a blank on, we fixed the Provo problem. We've put ourselves on the right path towards sustainability with our infrastructure and things like that. And so we've put a lot of these things, the most immediate problems that we usually have to deal with. Nothing's right on the horizon that's going to bite us, that we can't handle. So perhaps now is the time to look out a little bit and make some structural changes, if necessary, to put us on really solid footing for the next recession in 10 years or 8 years or in 16 years or, when the next natural disaster. I appreciate that the disaster preparedness. At the National League of Cities conference that I went to at the end of last year, stopped by a booth that was being run by a federal agency that's wants to get communities talking about resiliency. And that was one of the things I threw in there, so I don't know if anyone read it, but it's a little bit like emergency preparedness, it's a little bit like sustainability, but it's aspects of that, but it's a little bit different. It's not, just in the 72 hours after that emergency, but it's how quickly do our businesses come back online? How quickly is our rec center back up and running? How all of those things. If we have a major fire come down, what are some things that we can do? How will we be able to make it through the next recession? If we have a really good base and we build resiliency in, then a lot of these different things can hit us, but we're resilient. We can absorb it, and then we can get back on our feet and move forward. So, that's a possible thing. The other thing I wanted to mention, I think Tulsa, that's 11 years is a striking difference in life expectancy. I doubt we're going to see that kind of thing in Provo. We had our list of 9 before, and I think we made some good progress on certain ones and have a lot more work on others. But I would hate to have, if we have just one big focus, and if that's where all of our attention goes to and all of our funding goes to, I'd hate for that to derail our improvement on parking or make it so that we can't address staffing shortages in our police department, kind of thing. So I think there kind of needs to be a balance. I like the idea, Provo River restoration and turning our community to that. I think I kind of like that because that's something that people can rally around, but may not necessarily take the full bandwidth and the full additional resources of the city government. So I don't know, I'm just talking out loud. I'm not advocating for anything in particular, but I think this is a fascinating idea, and I'm interested to see where our conversation goes. Resilience parking, I think, could almost be big enough. If we could solve that. Infrastructure.
It's an exciting topic, too.
Well, it could get a lot of people really worked up, really excited. Infrastructure, first and foremost, the sewer treatment, but all other infrastructure. Housing, I think, is a huge thing. Affordable housing, just all of that, which ties into the homeless. And so there's some great ideas.
So, Mr. Hardy, a lot of the stuff you're talking about too, and the whole idea of talking about a big idea, or something that would galvanize the effort, doesn't diminish the idea that we have other ideas, other priorities that we're going to address too. We just wanted to try and get to one idea for this group to gel around and make that a focus, but it doesn't diminish the idea that there's other priorities that have to be accomplished. So George had some.
Short comment. David still brought up parking. you brought up parking. The two biggest issues facing us right now financially are the sewer treatment plant and the possible problem with parking with the county.
Yeah.
And the manifestation of the over-occupancy is the parking. So somehow, if you think about what's going to excite people negatively, it's parking. So somehow, I don't know how we attack that. It's not a big audacious idea, obviously, but it's certainly something that we need to work on seriously.
Probably,
because
at minimum, probably is going to be one of your priorities.
when Mr. Paxman brought up how many $million? $26 million?
For the parking structure.
That's a huge issue with the county, if you took that to solve it. And again, the manifestation of over-occupancy, and what our top priority is parking. And that's what the people that are concerned about it talk about always.
George, and then let's go and
Yeah, I
make sure we
just
get the
had a
mayor.
question that you partially answered. I mean, I was assuming that this big idea was not mutually exclusive of these other priorities, which I think are
Correct.
really, really
What we
important.
talked
I didn't-
about was in the
yeah.
budgeting for outcomes discussion, to have something that we could go in and use as our test for outcomes, but also which supersedes, if you will, or causes us to reach a little bit beyond ourselves
Yeah.
to accomplish.
So maybe we can be on vacation and take care of our to-do list. at
Take
the
care of our
same
needs.
time.
Exactly. Larry, can we wait till after the mayor gives hers?
Okay.
Sure. Okay.
Just before we switch administration, I mean, I just commented that I do think that the sewer treatment plant is a big deal, only because I'm hearing developers now that are calling and saying, I can't put my development next to where we won't dump our sewer. And so they're at a standstill, and community development can't give an answer, and it's a huge cost, $220, $240 million. That's gonna, I don't know how we budget for that, and it's gonna take funds from a lot of places, I think. So I think that's something that we've got to deal with. If the lake has the algae blooms again, and stronger pressure from EPA to do something, I think there's just 2 or 3 things that are going, that's got to happen very quickly. The decision made. Even if we may say we're not going to build down, well, then that's the developer say, okay, then our sewer's got to run to the east. And then we can make some decisions that way. But right now, we can't. We're in limbo, and it's hurting the developers. And maybe we want to slow the developers down, that's okay, if that's what we want to do, but that's a critical decision they can't make right now.
That's great, thank you, and thank you for all your input. I know when we had our meeting and kind of talked about the big idea, I think it's great. And the reason I think it's great is because it brings both of us, both arms of government together. And my whole focus was to wrap our arms around something that can be resolved within 2 years. Something that we can say, we're going to unite the city council and the administration, and we are going to attack this problem and solve it in the next 2 years, so that we can have something to show for our hard works. And so that's kind of where my thinking was. We got together as an administration and we came up with 3. And each one of us is going to talk about one. And so my number one thing that I thought, and I actually, we had a whole bunch, but we brought it down to 3. And I respect Wayne's and Isaac's as much as mine. So they're just being polite and letting me go first. But my issue that I would like to wrap my arms around and solve in the next 2 years would be to resolve wisely the water treatment plant and the water reclamation system. The reason I believe that so strongly is because as the mayor, I'm not here to make things beautiful and lovely, and I am to a point, but my job is to run the city. And to be able to look at my constituents and say, you know what? You're fine, go ahead, flush your toilet. Your sewer's not gonna come up in your shower. I feel that huge responsibility that if that's where the weakness is. So I started doing a little research. Our pipes are 36-inch lines. We need to have, when I talk to them, this is something that has to be addressed immediately. It's not something we can say, let's just dive deep in 10 years or 5 years. No, we need to have some answers by springtime, is what they told me. The property, we do own some property north of the airport. And as I was thinking of this and how I could present it to you, I have an uncle that's a nuclear physicist that is at UCLA and has a building named after him. And when I talk to him, I just have to really write every word down and then go back and read it 3 times. But when I was giving him a list of 6 priorities that I felt were important to the city, I said, Uncle John, will you please, he lives down in Laguna, and I said, he is a graduate of BYU, and I said, would you please prioritize these? This is what we've got, and before we even hung up, he said, I already know what the number 1 is. It's your sewage system. That has got to be addressed. He said, that is what your city council will be held accountable for. That's what you'll be held accountable for. That's your job, is to make sure that your city runs smooth. So he said, it's a no-brainer. A couple things when I went and talked to them, the sewage getting from Provo High, the new Provo High School on the west side, our sewage system, my uncle said, is supposed to be located at the lowest point of your city. And maybe when ours was put in, it was. Who knows? At this point, it's not at all. And so we're having to pump 3 lift stations, which are $1 million to $1.5 million each lift station, just from the new Provo High to get it over here to be treated, which isn't big enough to treat for probably even more than 3 or 4 or 5 more years. It was built in 1955. Most of the pipes are concrete, which causes the biggest problem, which is leaky joints, because they wouldn't even think of, it's against the law to use concrete pipes now for this type of a water reclamation plant. There are 13 public lift stations in Provo right now, and every time one breaks or there's an issue, you're not talking hundreds of thousands, you're talking millions to fix. It's put a hold on our development, which I think some of the generational farmers are thrilled about, because it's slowed down some of our economic development. But the bigger problem is the legislature is putting new regulations stating that phosphorus limits have to be brought down. And when I talked to them, they said they don't even have the capability and capacity to meet those. They're actually asking to extend 2 years before we start getting fined as a city. So I know it's not glamorous. I called a couple mayors that I know, and they said, Michelle, go dig up one of the broken cement 1955 pipes, because they were stamped back in those days. And that will be your kickoff to the city. Look what we found, and we're gonna fix this for you. And they just feel like, and I feel like, that's something that is it's expensive, but it's something I think the constituents understand and will get behind. And yeah, if we put a Band-Aid here and a Band-Aid there, but our city we're growing and we're getting too big. And I just think that it's one of those things that if we really came together and got on board, all of us, that it's something we could get accomplished in the next couple of years. And the outcomes would be significant, and we'd be doing our job as city leaders.
I very much support that. And as I think about what we can do as a city and other groups to become involved around this, we had a really good campaign that went forward when we did the UTF. And I think that those are things that other people outside of the administration can also get on board with and talk about and get excited about and understand why their rates are going to go up. That'll help. We need to do that.
And education is just the end all be all. If you educate the constituents, they'll buy in.
Bill Pepperoni?
Mayor, for every one farmer that is glad that there's a delay in development because of infrastructure issues, there are 2 or 3 farmers who are frustrated that want to sell their land now but can't.
But they can't because of the
these
infrastructure. So that even feeds more into the reason that this needs to be looked at seriously, and it meets what we were talking about, something that both arms of government can get behind and support and get it taken care of.
My messaging brain is kicking in here, and I think the message isn't so much sewage, which isn't exactly, it's like parking, you know, it's not an exciting topic, and it can make people mad, but
Now, I
water,
might be the sewer mayor.
but water is life, right? Water is the greatest resource, one of the greatest resources we have in this city. So making a campaign around the protection of our water resources, and that this is the number
All
one
tied
priority
together.
to it. I mean, I'm thinking a little bit selfishly in saying that, you know, if the river project appeals to anybody, it doesn't have to be the next 2 years. It doesn't have to be
Yes,
as urgent as this, but it can be part of the same sort of idea that this city understands its dependence on water, it understands its responsibility to water. I mean, you don't want a Flint, Michigan situation happening here. You don't want anything like that to happen. And so it does appeal to our most fundamental responsibilities, but it can be part of a broader campaign that really just celebrates pure water, you know,
Well,
and healthy
What we're known for
resources.
is our great water.
You can also tie it to an economic development message, because you can look at it and say, okay, you know, we've done a lot of good things here, and let's make sure we have the infrastructure we need to go forward. So,
I think you're very practical, I like it. Economic development, well, what you'll get on the west side is mostly homes, which take resources. And hopefully we can finally get over whatever it is that keeps us from having a grocery store on the west side, so that we can recapture that sales tax that's just leaking out of Provo.
So now that's a perfect segue into number 2, benchmarks, which is Isaac. This was our second big idea we came up with.
And Wayne's going to help me out on this because it was his idea, and they just wanted to make sure I had one to talk about. I actually was on the sewer side of things, saying that, and I think I'm going to do a little bit of thinking out loud, like Mr. Harding did maybe, but we've talked about these big outcomes and these big hairy ideas and that kind of thing, and I don't know that the sewage one is that, but it's clearly our fundamental priority. But maybe we can have a fundamental priority and a Provo River type fun, cool, unifying, positive thing. And I'm also just, again, wrapping my mind around this, the idea also seems to be to have data points, and we'd have to think about what are our data points that we can experiment with different approaches to try to get the river where it is. And if we can't, maybe the river isn't quite exactly what they were describing. This isn't a criticism of anything. I'm just trying to understand all the different pitches we've heard and ways to go about this, and just saying we'll want to keep in mind all of these, but I think all of these ideas are good, and yes, I'm on board with the mayor that the fundamental priority, and if we couldn't even have a big, fun, cool idea, we still have to do the sewage, so we'll have to do it, but I hope we'll come up with a cool one as well. This idea from Wayne, and he'll help me out with, was basically to look at retail, that retail has been something we've heard a lot about, and we would want to come up with a goal where we could, and this would be very data driven, we'd say, here's our sales tax from retail right now, let's increase it by, and again, help me if I'm wrong, by about 2% adjusted for inflation, so we won't give ourselves any credit for inflation over the 2-year period, and let's nudge that up to a mark that we set, and with that goal in mind that's measurable, we can start looking at things like hiring out Buxton Consulting, I think it's called, that is a group that will bring in retail to a site. You give them a site and you give them $80,000, and they have, the Rolodex with all the top retailers, and they can go get them to come and sell the place. And so you spend a little money, but you get a nice anchor, like the ones we discussed, where if you get a Cheesecake Factory, that's a big draw apparently up in Fashion Place Mall. When you got a Cheesecake Factory, it was a game changer. A Mac store is a game changer, and so. But the fundamental idea, I think, was just to have a retail related goal that's defined by a percentage increase from today, and then throw resources at that and measure ourselves. And that, I think that at least is precisely the kind of data-driven exercise that I was hearing being talked about, where you say, hey, let's try Buxton for one. Let's give them $80,000 in one location. Let's see what happens when they do their magic, and see if it is magic. And if it isn't magic, then with the next location, we look at a different strategy. What's our different strategy? But it would at least lend itself to that kind of experimentation and checking of data that I was hearing about.
It leads itself towards economic development, which helps fund some of the other things, and it fits within budgeting for outcomes. So.
Clean that up, Wayne.
But no, I think you did it very well. I think, as you know, those of you who are on the campaign trail this year, I continue to hear from folks that economic development, particularly as it relates to retail, is it's not revenue driven, it's quality of life driven. We're sick and tired of having to drive 10 miles north or 10 miles south to find the stuff we're looking for in the retail environment we want to experience. And so again, that's, most cities try to look at it from a revenue perspective. I think it's become a quality of life perspective for our residents. So again, that was kind of my impetus behind having it on my top 3 list. So.
Okay, so you're the third one now.
Okay, well, let me share, and I want you to know how infrequently Councilman Connect and I agree on things, but we happen to agree on this one.
We're making progress.
I'm just teasing. But the other thing that I hear most frequently from our residents is the idea of having a housing stock in Provo that addresses all economic levels. So again, there's available housing stock to meet all housing needs and economic needs. And so that sort of transitions, and I think it may potentially start at the furthest low end in my mind, which is the unwilling homeless. So those folks who want to find a way out, who are homeless by a set of circumstances, not by choice, and all the way through the Young Single Professionals group, through the, as we talked today, and some of you have heard former Councilmember Healy talk about this issue of regentrifying older neighborhoods, and the idea that you will drag the Healys out of their home in pine boxes because although they have 6 bedrooms and they are just 2 of them there today, and they travel a lot and so on, they will not leave to create space for a young family with children to help regentrify the neighborhood and support the local schools, because they don't want to leave their lifelong friends. And so this idea of creating a variety of housing stocks even within neighborhoods, so that there is a place for the Healys to go, and free up that housing stock to increase our population and support and sustain our schools and bring more volunteers and all of those kinds of things. So sort of the big goal would be the concept of creating over a period of several years a housing stock which addresses all housing types and economic interests. So and that seems to me to be one of the more challenging concepts I've heard about sort of a really big idea. So that was the third one the administration came up with. And again, not this always creates a challenge for you to think I'm not in alignment with the mayor because I advance the cause. I absolutely believe the wastewater treatment plant and collection system capacity issues are the #1 problem to solve. I'm not sure that again really constitutes sort of the visionary goal that people can get aligned with. And honestly, I think it's going to happen. We're going to make that decision one way or another sometime this year. That decision will be made. It'll be made by default if we do nothing. And so again, I think that's going to happen regardless. But would one of these others or others that have been suggested today kind of meet that criteria for being the one big thing or 2 big things? And maybe the wastewater treatment plant is one big thing and something else is the second big thing. But anyway, so those are the 3 ideas that sort of surfaced from our discussions internally with the city administration.
Larry's been trying to get our attention for the last 3 speakers, so.
It's just, I think that there's a way to combine some of these really good ideas. If we sort of step up a level or two. And when I think about the values that I've identified that the council has settled on, when I think about thriving commerce, the thought that occurred to me is that we ought to be a major outdoor recreation destination. And if we think about it in those terms, that addresses the question of the river, it includes the question of water quality and what we're doing with the lake. It also opens up areas for economic opportunity and economic development with that focus that we want to attract outdoor recreation enthusiasts to our community. I think on the other dimension was the healthy environment, and there I think the question of this whole area of suicide rates and homelessness and opioids addiction and safety on the and crime on the trail, all of that factors together into some view of what it means to have a healthy environment. I just encourage you to sort of step up several levels and look at it from a higher level and say, what's the vision? Where are we trying to go with this? Yes, we need a new sewage treatment plant, but as Wayne said, that's going to happen. The question is, how does that fit into the larger objectives that you're trying to achieve?
So something around identity.
I agree with what Larry's saying there, because we are doing a lot of great and wonderful things in our community. And as we do these things, if we can look ahead, I think of what we've got going on University Avenue in front of office buildings that I get to associate with. And as I do that, what's the vision that we want to create there? Wow, that's happening. Look at the vision, step it up, and just say, we are actually doing these things. And now we're a little bit late on some of those things, but we've got other streets. I know that there's some talk around 1200 and Bulldog there. And what is the vision that we have for that? And some of the where are we looking with what we are doing? Are we looking far enough ahead?
And big enough.
And big enough.
Yeah, so are we thinking more, I mean, my thought was this was something that we could come together and it could be like a 2-year, look, we're coming out with this, we're gonna address it and go at it, although we're still doing our everything else. This is a particular item the city council and administration have come together and are gonna see accomplished within the next 2 years. But just because you're the 9, that was just huge and overwhelming to me. I just thought, really? Wow, there's going to be a turnover of probably 5 councils before those 9 goals get met. And at that point, some of them might not even be applicable. Well, I'm not conducting the meeting, so I'm going to stop calling on people.
No, that's good.
Is this Cliff still, or?
Is it council members or Cliff?
Okay, if I can make a
Go ahead.
comment. So I am fully on board with the water treatment plant. I think that needs to be, if not the highest priority, maybe the most urgent priority. I think this is not necessarily a 2-year, I mean, we've looked at it, it's going to be a 30-year rollout, but we need to have a plan. We need to have a plan soon. To me, it's not a 2-year. To me, it's, if we can't do it in 3 months, we need to have decisions made in 6 months, would be my take on it. I wrote about it in here. A couple things are, the state has some money now that it can grant out, but that's going to get pulled, other people are going to get it if we don't get to it first. And then also there's a limit to how many competent, qualified
Businesses that can
do it. And we need to get one of them very, very, very quickly. And so I'm really thinking, I'm totally on board. We need to do it. It needs to be high urgency for us. What I don't see in it that some of the things that we want it to have is something that like the whole community can get on board with. I think this is something that is very much a council administration thing that we're going to kind of set a plan. I mean, we'll get input or whatever, but we're going to do it. Where I think some of these other plans is how do we get multiple agencies and charities involved? How do we get the public doing their part and really be able to rally the whole community to move something forward? so many that we've talked about are important, but both retail and housing stock, both of those just so resonate with me. You know, with the retail, I mean, I think we can have these data points, because I really think metrics are going to be so important going forward. But you know, so we can try this initiative, try that initiative, but we can also go out and we can try to convince the community. You know, if you're not buying in Provo, you're helping pay for other cities' services rather than our city services. So we can have this campaign and if it is something that everyone rallies around, I think there's something that everyone can do. Maybe this. I've written in the past about how the city council really can't mandate that a grocery store goes in, but what if the administration and the council both said this is one of our top priorities? Maybe we can get grocery stores somehow. You know, so I think there's something that everyone can do on that one. And then housing stock, I don't think maybe is quite as flashy, but talking about something that's going to move the needle, something that's going to make a difference in 50 years, in 75 years, it's building the housing stock now. Anyway, so that's just my response to the three presentations. I think all of them have a place in what we do going forward.
Yeah, I just would want to echo, I think, what I hear Larry saying. I think, I mean, as I'm looking over the description of the big idea, if this is, again, what we're looking for, we've got a lot of these are, like I say, very, very important and should be priorities, but I don't know that they need something higher level to describe them or to sort of create a space for them to become priorities. And I'm thinking, I hear sort of two large words coming out of this, and one is community. You know, when we're talking about homelessness and housing stock and neighborhoods and proximity of retail, all of that has to do with the quality of life within the community of the city of Provo and the feeling about this, the kind of community that we're creating. And environment is another word that jumps out because of the water issues and the recreational qualities of the city. So I'm just trying to think of sort of language that's doing the kinds of things like an emotional connection. I mean, again, sewage and parking are not, I mean, they're emotional, but not in the way that I think this is appealing to, right? Distinct and reimagining, topic for discussion, pierces through cultural and ethnic borders, universal. I think we need sort of bigger visionary language in order to capture these really high priorities, which I don't see. I mean, I guess I'm just echoing what's been said. I don't see these as mutually exclusive thoughts here. It's not a matter of do we go after the visionary stuff and neglect the high priorities that are really urgent, or vice versa. I just think we need some kind of language to capture these, and those are sort of the two areas. You know, the human community of Provo and how people feel about the culture here and how they feel about their neighborhoods, how they feel about their identity as a community, and as we know, things like housing and things like parking become very divisive of community, right? They erode the feeling of community precisely because they become problems, and then people point fingers. Homelessness is another way in which community is eroded because people panic about whether or not we have the resources to take care of people in those situations. So then the sort of priorities about how to address the health of the community can become priorities rather than big ideas, I guess is all I'm saying.
Let me share something. Let me share something that early in my career, I worked in a community that was undergoing major transition because we'd lost our forestry industry, we'd lost our fishery, well, most of our fishery, we lost some of the things that we were doing. So we were trying to transition into a tourist, eco-tourist town, and still retain some semblance of forestry, some semblance of the fishery that we had. And we ended up creating what we called the Ucluelet Economic Development Corporation, and we used that as a tool to try and do more investment in our city. Now, I'm not suggesting we do it. We've got actually a pretty good economy, but lot of those things get solved by having a vibrant economy in Provo. Now, in Provo, we are faced with challenges from Silicon Slopes as that develops. And maybe one of the things we could wrap our heads around and wrap our passions around is not just a kind of a shop Provo, but expand the economic opportunities in Provo, raise salaries, create better housing, all of these things as some kind of marketing campaign to get and retain what we have, but also to expand our opportunities rather than, go through to some kind of decline.
I spent 4 years doing economic development. Much of it's outside our control. As much as we would like to have Cheesecake Factory or Trader Joe's, they chose to go somewhere else. No matter what we did, I shouldn't say that. There probably would have been something that we could do, but I think we need to have economic development tell us what are they lacking that we can make a change in that would help them do the economic development. Because it's not, basically, when I heard that on the campaign trail, I go, you just don't know what you're talking about. How easy it is. Somehow we're going to just get economic development. It's difficult. I know I did it. We spent $12 million buying a piece of property that allowed the mall to come. Without having done that, we never would have had the mall. So if there's some things that we need to do to have economic development, Dixon needs to tell us what they are. Things that we can actually affect the change in.
And I also, thank you, George. Please go up and get the the snacks before we get away. But I see my community development people have gone here. And I really think that we got to look at our problems to get the big picture. Sometimes the big picture is great, and if we look at the problems, it'll help us develop the picture for the big picture. We look at the problems and the assets, the river. What a great asset that we're not taking advantage of. And I need their help in recognizing how we can do those things. And one other thing that George mentioned in our budget committee meeting, we need to develop some matrices to determine what progress we're making. But we need to decide how are we actually, if we want something on the river, what are the matrices that we want that we're getting? Are we getting more people on the river? Are we getting more parks around the river? Are we getting more development around the river? Is that what we want? Or what we need? We haven't got the matrices built to determine what we're doing.
Dixon had his hand up.
Dixon.
So sometimes people ask me what I do for Provo City, and I tell them that whatever it takes. So at some point, as you're establishing these priorities, you as a council have the last 2 retail deals that we brought you approved, and we really do appreciate that. And we have probably at least 2 or 3 more deals that we will be bringing you. And again, we'll look for your continued support on those. Provo has always been very prudent, at least in my estimation, on the deals that we do get involved in. And there's a lot of deals that we don't because we don't need to, because why incent water to run downhill? But there will be a couple that will have to pump water uphill to make them work. And again, they're always performance-based. They're typically post-performance. The city's not just out writing checks. It's if you perform and you bring something to the table that's more than what we have now, then we could possibly give some of that back to you. And that's typically how our deals have worked. And so we anticipate in the very near future bringing at least 2 of those to you and possibly 3. And again, look for your continued support in doing those. George is right. It is hard. We don't operate in a vacuum. We are very much impacted by our national and state economy, but Provo does well. And I think we'll have some numbers to show you in the very near future of what we are doing retail-wise in the city. It is continuing to grow. It's not it's not a model that looks like this. It's a little more flat, but it is growing. But we need to continue to be about that. And again, right now, it's not about
a budget crisis. It's quality of life, but if we're not careful, it could become a budget crisis issue. And so we'll again look for your continued support in what we can do, but appreciate, at least on the last two deals that we brought you, that there was support. And what we're talking about there was on the Parkway and then on University Avenue and the IFA. So those are two deals that we appreciate your support in those two.
So my comments at this point in this meeting are as follows, and if I don't explain myself well, I apologize. I'm going to do my best. It seems to me this is a unique opportunity to come up with something unique. The problems of parking and of the wastewater treatment are going to be your day-to-day life, whatever happens today. And it seems to me it might not be a bad idea to say, let's figure out the best thing we have so far that we might rally upon. And then unless we beat it with something else, let's say that's tentatively at least the idea. I'm speaking maybe out of turn or whatever. And I hope that makes sense. What I'm saying is, I think it would be a great goal that we're going to walk out of here with something that we think is as close as we could come up with to a big idea. And in saying this, let me say, today's opportunity, in my mind, is the opportunity to come up with something. Parking's going to work itself out one way or another because of your diligence and focus over the weeks and months ahead, and that's not to say that you won't take vision and everything else, but those issues will be barking at you. Today's opportunity is to think of things like the Provo River Trail, in my humble opinion, or maybe this sales tax goal, the kind of thing that you wouldn't think of in an ordinary meeting. This higher level of vision or whatever. So my comment is, I urge us all to try to stay focused on this little bit out of the box, out of the routine thought process idea. And to me, the best maybe three things I've heard along those, and this is just me and I may have missed one, but the Provo River Trail initiative to me is in that category of this is not what's going to come up just day to day. That's a retreat feeling idea, and we might as well grab a retreat feeling idea, an idea that feels like something that was part of a retreat. We might as well grab onto something like that today, and I don't see the big downside to having a goal like that. Also, the sales tax might be one of them where we say we're going to increase by 2%. And maybe that's the wrong number, but we're gonna come up with that type of thing. And maybe the third one that maybe is a possible is we're gonna increase our status as an outdoor recreation destination. Again, that's just another one that feels like an idea born of a retreat rather than just our run-of-the-mill doing. So, and I'm reluctant to say this, but if you want me to facilitate channeling discussion to keep us focused on what beats this idea and where are we at on liking this idea or not, I would be willing to do that. I'd be happy to have Cliff do it. I don't want to do it, to be honest, but I think I will do it if you want me to. But so that's the idea, is let's hold on to the best ideas we have. Let's weigh those. Let's see if we can get one higher than it that's better. And as we walk out of here, let's leave one in the status of, that's our decision today. We might email each other and say, that was a bad decision. But we at least walked out of here, something we can wrap onto that was our retreat. That's the fruit of our retreat.
And let me put some background on that too. A lot of these things are going to show up, I think, in your priorities as you come to them, and you're going to be dealing with them and challenging through anyway. Part of the reason we wanted to have this conversation about a big idea or it was outcomes discussion was we wanted to try and move the needle on budgeting for outcomes. And so this, by reaching out for something at a higher level and stretching and bringing different resources to bear, we wanted to identify an outcome that we can measure and have a significant impact on the city.
So when we talk about big ideas and visioning, I'm immediately drawn back to Vision 2030 and 50. And you know, when you think outside of the box, hopefully we're not thinking so far out of the box that it's not something that's already in Vision 20, 30, or 50. That should be the box we're looking in to find a big idea that people can get behind, because in theory, that's the vision that everyone is supporting. So what in that box is worthy of our attention? And the regional soccer facility on the west side that would bring people from outside of Provo is kind of goes hand in hand with figuring out what we're doing on the west side and the sewage treatment plant and all that. But hopefully whatever we pick is something that, like I say, is right at the core of the Vision 20, 30, 50.
I hear what Isaac is saying. I understand that. And we may need to go through the process that we went through to get these other priorities, is just give the council members an opportunity to look at them for a day. I can see how housing is going to be a huge impact on our economic development process. How we can really make a difference in housing and economic development. So maybe we need to look at it as a council and as this administration and just say, okay, these are the things we talked about today. Let's prioritize this and get it and narrow it down. I like the idea of housing. I like the idea of economic development. And then go back to the people that can help us accomplish those things. Do we want to do that as a council? Can we put that together?
Yeah, I think so, okay.
As I hear these big ideas, and most of them require dollars. It's going to have huge economic impact. So it seems like if we don't have economic development to have the funds or some sources that we haven't discovered yet, it's going to be pretty hard to do any of these things without just raising taxes and raising fees. But we can't do that. We got to. So then I say, okay, then how do we increase the economic development? Then we need sales tax. So we talk about housing. Well, housing, I think housing has a negative benefit on the community. It costs us money to build a house and to service whatever it takes to serve that house. So every time we approve a neighborhood or development, we're automatically saying we're having this negative impact on our budget.
And this is, you're right, Kay, and this is where I get frustrated, because there's also conflicting ideas, because that house that comes into the community is going to bring money into that because of jobs.
And the other thing, so I think we had a little discussion earlier, somebody kind of titled, maybe George, that the big idea is the quality of life, and these things wrap into that. I can't remember if that was your comment or not. Same thing with air quality is an issue. Well, the more people we invite into our community, and George, you're the pro at this. I mean, we can do a whole bunch on all of our homes, our heating equipment, our cars, our gasoline. There's still a point where a person causes an impact on our air quality. So the more people we invite in, the bigger impact we have there. So I'm just having all these conflicts of things pulling us in some different directions.
Sure.
And it kind of wraps around that quality of living thing. Do we say what the people we need to bring into our community are the people that are going to come in and spend their money and go? Not come in and stay and require our services. We want them to come, spend money, and go.
We just make that as our fault.
And how do we, I don't know, I'm kind of struggling at this.
So it just reminds me of way back when we were considering doing iProvo, which was a big, big investment. And we went to, well, let's see, I don't know if they came to us, but we all got together to hear about how wonderful the new high-speed internet was going to be. And we had another community from somewhere come and be part of the discussion. And they were not, even though they wanted fiber like we did, they were not like us, because they were mostly business. They had virtually no one that lived in their city. And they weren't looking to loan for 30 years or whatever. They were looking to pay cash on the barrelhead because they had the money. And they had the money because people literally did come in, spend their money, and leave. They didn't have to provide services for anybody, really. And so there is that balance. And like you say, just building neighborhoods, if they spend all their tax money outside of Provo and we don't have that balance, we lose. In the long run, we lose.
And has anybody studied 2030 and 2050 enough that they can tell me two common factors that have been pointed out in each of those documents that we've committed or the community said these are what we want done? Is one a grocery store on the west side, or does anybody, I'm looking them up right now, but they're big documents, so to go through them and find a matching source of both.
Mayor, there's a lot of commonality to them.
Is there?
And so really what 2050 does is moves beyond what we've accomplished with 2030 and kind of expands it, maybe refocuses a few things here and there, but a lot of the themes are very much the same.
It's basically a revision too, so
Yeah.
most of the things.
So did we commit to having a grocery store by 2030? I just
Discussed at the time.
We didn't at the time? Okay, I was just reading Dave's email. But I like the idea of looking into our 2030 and pulling out if that's, the background's been done. Okay, keep talking, everyone keep going.
Are you taking input from the public, general public, being me?
We usually don't super often or any time, but.
Not usually?
Not usually, but we will, we want to do that. But,
You tell me when I've got some.
does anyone have anything else that they want to talk about? We could hear from them. Dave?
Just thinking about Kay's comment, is it possible to tie two of these things together, like for example, we set a goal to raise retail sales tax by, say 2%, I'd say like 20% or something, because you have a Buy Provo campaign and that, and then plus we got some new deals coming in, and the combination of these two, and then when we hit that, now we're gonna do the river project or whatever, just a thought.
In response to that, so there is a section of the river that, through the city, that is, we could say, underutilized. There's part of it that, even the Provo River Trail doesn't follow the Provo River, and there's pretty difficult things about trying to fix that. But there's still places, near Bulldog, where I think all the community engagement with that part of the river is every couple of years we have to do a cleanup and we pull the shopping carts out and all of the trash. Businesses have put fences up, because it's a liability, and they build their, it's in their back alleyway, where I haven't looked at I want to watch the video, I haven't taken the opportunity yet, but there are communities that instead of turning their back to something like the river, they embrace it, and their development is focused on the river. If that's some of what we're talking about with maximizing and kind of focusing on Provo River, that may help us with economic development. That may help us create shopping experiences that people are going to want to do. And so I would hope that it would be the driver, but might be one of the reasons or one of the outcomes of focusing on the river would be some of the economic development that would bring.
I think that's Dixon on the mix. Do they have river property?
They worked pretty hard with BYU and tried to make that happen.
They got motion pictures to do it.
Yeah, so that they weren't able to bring that about. They made a pretty mighty effort with two different groups, both BYU and the church. Proximity, but not money.
I think identity has a lot of power in terms of drawing. It does end up potentially drawing the kinds of business, a certain kind of business, if the identity of Provo is based in its particular environment and its culture, right? And so that tends to drive away certain kind of businesses that say, we're not going to get anywhere in Provo because they're not going to be interested in the products that we sell. But other companies would say, this is the kind of community that we want to be a part of. So I do think in terms of just the general messaging about who we are as a community and the kind of visionary language we use about that's super important. I mean, it's probably a chicken and the egg kind of thing, and maybe it's a matter of both and. You know, you try to raise the retail rates as much as you can, but you don't necessarily have to wait for that to happen to say, we already know who we are, we already know what our priorities are, we already know what kinds of projects we're interested in developing and promoting, and what kinds of messages we want to send to the community about what our priorities are. And I think you can have both of those.
So sometimes I feel like Provo economically is a wallflower. I have been for a while. And these businesses keep going to Orem, Spanish Fork, whatever. And I don't know the conversations, the flavor of them at Dixon when you talk to people about, hey, do you want to come to Provo? I don't know if they honestly tell you all the reasons why they do or don't want to come to Provo, but it would be interesting. I don't know if you've taken the tack of going to businesses that have recently located elsewhere and say, so why did you choose this community? Why did you go to Orem or Spanish Fork or wherever in the valley? And they might be, it would just be interesting to hear their explanation, like, well, you know, it was all...
Let me answer that real quick.
Yeah.
You've seen the sign for Wavetronics and where it sits? It sits in Springville now. And it was a conscious decision, frankly, I'm glad you did, okay? Because we told them we were not willing to take up the entire golf course. You should be proud of that decision. And so you don't always have to say yes. So there's a case in point where we told Wavetronics when they came to us with Rocky Mountain, we're not willing to do this because it would take our entire golf course. And again, that's a decision that you should be proud of, and those are decisions. We just did not have 30 acres of campus for Wavetronics to locate in, and that was their decision. And we obviously made a decision just last week on 21 acres, but we weren't willing to do 50, and that's okay, because now we have a golf course and a medical school that will be coming, but Wavetronics did go elsewhere, and they went south, which is better than going north.
Well, I think that's precisely an example of, if, you know, and I hate to pick on Orem, but if you decide that all you're interested in is retail and you don't have a sense of your own identity, you end up with State Street in Orem, which is hideous.
Yep.
And everybody in Provo knows that that's hideous and knows that Provo is preferable because it doesn't have that. So I think that's a tribute to a community that said, we have a sense of who we are, and if we can just be clear about that and articulate that, then I think it then guides the economic development in a healthy way.
The same thing, Ogden says no to a lot of things, but they say yes, again, to the outdoor recreation industry. So they say no a lot because they know who they are. And Provo, I think we know who we are, but we're not Ogden, we're certainly not Orem. We're kind of maybe a mixed bag of things, but again, we can continue to refine that. So we will continue to say no, so we say yes to the right deals.
Let me suggest something to you. Last year when I was finishing up my MBA, I had a class on innovation, and one of the things we had to come up with was a project, and the project that came up with was expanding the startup community in Provo. That's an area where we have a bit of a niche. That's an area where we have some advantage. Something like that could help, you know, with an innovation program to try and expand that sector might be a good way to start and take advantage of what we do have here, which is 2 universities, a lot of young people, a lot of people who are creative that way. That would be one. But I'm going to suggest something, because we haven't really gelled around one idea. We've got lots of good ideas that we can focus on. We have 2 hours left in today's meeting. We're going to need at least half hour for the budget discussion. but we wanted to focus on identifying some priorities. And so what I'm going to suggest is, let's take a 5-minute break and then come back and refocus on starting to establish council's priorities for the next couple of years. Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Please, that'd be good.
Okay.
Welcome back, we'll turn the time back to Claire.
Okay. So a couple things. Kay's going to be gone for a bit. He's got a meeting over at Community Development. We've had some technical difficulties. I just want you to know this. We've had some technical difficulties because of the videos that we showed. We got shut down on YouTube, so we've got a workaround that we're working around. But it means that after the meeting, at some point, we'll probably have to piece together different pieces of broadcast to put this all together for consumption later.
You offended YouTube?
Well, we think that apparently we probably shouldn't have shown the TED Talk and we didn't realize it. So we're working around it. But in case you want, if you get questions as to why people couldn't follow, continuity-wise, that's why. Okay. So to restate, we apparently haven't gelled around one big idea yet, so we'll come back to it whether today or another day, but it's time to start working through some of the priorities. These are the 9 priorities that council had adopted back in 2016, and I just wanted to get your sense. Are we done with zoning compliance as a priority?
No.
Okay. How about DAPR, development approval?
Pretty close.
Can we shut it down as a number priority? Okay. General plan, I would argue that because it's in progress and we're working on it, bring it to you early this year, that I wouldn't worry about making it a priority for the next 2 years.
What if you drew a little arrow, so it's general plan, arrow, vision 2050?
Well, that would be your new one, right?
Well,
New
it's
priority?
like they're tied together, and so you finish one, you go into the other, and then it's kind of like feedback
Okay.
loop, because they are tied together.
Yeah, and we'll do a follow-up to that after. Economic development, keep it, drop it?
No.
No, keep it?
No as in drop it, or no as in keep it?
It's got to continue to be
I
a
say we
priority.
do it.
It's with the mayor, so I'm with her.
I agree, but I'm just asking the question.
Like, no, you can never drop economic development.
There are things that we're gonna have to deal with that economic development.
Yeah.
If we keep it as a priority, they're gonna come back to us and we need to be aware of that. They're gonna come back to their incentives.
Housing, we all agreed that housing's gonna stick around? Okay. Budget for priorities? Okay. Structured policy.
I'd like to make a pitch for that. I think we made some good effort, good work with writing the
Council handbook, yeah.
But I think there's a couple more things that need to be done. Does it have to be a priority? I guess we could do it not as a priority, but I think there's some very specific things that I'd like to get done on that. I don't think we've accomplished what we need to accomplish.
Okay. That's a question for you. I mean, you're in leadership, you can push that anyway, right, in terms of trying to move that forward. But in terms of, and one of the questions we're going to ask, and Dave Harding asked this that I haven't shared yet, but the question Dave Harding asked is, this time we've had 9 priorities, and we've tried to make progress, here and there, kind of like the carnival horse, see who gets to the end, right? The question really is going forward, whether 3 or 6 or 9 or 12 or 15 or 2 or whatever, what is the right number of priorities that we should focus on? And when you're talking about what we're focused on, are we going to do it like the horse race, or are we going to say, no, we're going to really push on one area until we got it where we want it, and then we're going to bring something up, say, from the bullpen? So that's a thought to think about.
So as far as the number, I had the feeling that 9 was a lot. I prefer to get it down to maybe 5 or something. It seems like you can't focus on everything all at once.
Okay.
I kind of feel that way. It's a matter of bandwidth. Do you have enough council members that can be on enough committees and spend enough time with enough staff to actually be doing everything at once?
Right. And that's my question, because at some point, if we keep, right now, for example, I would argue to you that West Side, that because it's now in the hands of community development, that we can probably move beyond this one, right? And then public engagement, we already talked last week about feeling pretty good about where we're at with that once we drop it off. And by that argument, then we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 priorities. And if you want new priorities, what's going to give? Where are they going to fit in the structure of things? George?
Well, if something isn't listed as a, I mean, if say we went to the minimalist approach and we said we're going to have 4 priorities, I'm assuming that doesn't necessarily mean that these things get erased. For example, if we said housing is our priority, but housing includes parking, zoning compliance, and to some degree economic development. Well, maybe
Yeah, because right now parking
but
falls.
certainly
fell
zoning
under here.
compliance and parking, right, are relevant to housing, and housing is also relevant to homelessness.
Right.
So if we just said, I don't know, I'd be in favor, the two things, I mean, maybe I'm stealing from the big ideas, but I feel like housing in the broadest sense, making sure that we have available housing options for people of every economic level, and that hopefully also means that we've got clear zoning laws and that they're enforced, and that also helps parking and quality of life issues, safety issues in the neighborhoods. That's just a big chunk to me. And then the other one seems to be this water issue. I mean, those feel like big priorities. I don't know if we want to put some language on top of that to call it a big idea, but it does seem to me that as far as like really big projects where we're going to have some meetings, we're going to have roll up our sleeves and really work at it, that housing issue jumps out at me, and the water treatment plant seems pretty big.
Infrastructure. So infrastructure one is, that seems to rise on a lot of lists. Dave, and then Dave.
So we have certain committees that are up and running and have been functioning fairly well, like the Housing Committee, the Zoning Compliance Committee, and there are certain members that have been invited that are experts, like on the Housing Committee, we have Habitat and the Provo Housing, NeighborWorks, and a variety of individuals. I don't know if there's 6 or 8, but it's pretty big, and they all contribute. It's very positive, but we have a separate group that gets together that are the experts on zoning, and they are related, but they're kind of mutually exclusive on their expertise. So if you want to, combine and say, well, housing is going to handle zoning, it still needs 2 committees, in my opinion. So I would.
Because you're looking at 2 different things. Your housing, you're looking at affordable housing, and your zoning, you're looking at compliance.
Right.
And one thing that stands out for me is one of the significant things this committee accomplished last year was the strategic plan, right?
Right.
And the rental dwelling license was just one element of that strategic plan. And so does this still need to be a priority in terms of something new, or do you just say we're going to have the zoning committee and their job is to focus on getting that strategic plan implemented?
Well, I'm just saying there's only so much bandwidth, and
Correct.
so many committees you can have.
Right.
And so I think those 2 committees are pretty solid, but we need to continue with them. However you want to structure, and
yeah,
it's.
But to go to George Stewart's comment earlier, is that on the campaign trail, right, this is what you guys heard about a lot.
Well, it's at the heart of maintaining the integrity of whatever you build. If you have a vision for whatever housing you build, but you don't enforce the rules, then it turns into whatever, and you lose that vision. And people due notice.
As I look at this, I can see budgeting, we talk about budgeting for priorities. There's so many things that could go in there. That has so much to do with the infrastructure. Because of the tire, so that's a budget committee item, that's a public works committee item, and we have all those things that are tied to that. So I don't mind leaving budgeting, but that, to me, that's infrastructure.
Budgeting.
That basically is infrastructure to me. Making sure we have the money to maintain what we've got and to improve what we need to do.
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of simplifying the list, that's all I'm saying. I'm not necessarily saying that we shouldn't have the separate committees for different things, but if a list of 9 looks like more than we can wrap our head around, and we just say we have 3 or 4 priorities, I think it's pretty easy to do that, and then you can decide, okay, you need a couple of committees to take care of different aspects of this one priority.
So we kind of encountered this 2 years ago. We can structure things a lot of different ways, and what we call things, I actually still think that we should not call them priorities, because, for example, the budgeting for priorities, at least in my opinion, the priorities referred to there are not like the 9 priorities that we've also referred to them as areas of focus. And so for the priorities, these 9 and what are we going to do going forward, we can do higher level ones that contain things, like housing and zoning compliance, economic development, all under the umbrella of housing, or we can try to bring them down maybe a level and say, we're going to focus specifically on zoning compliance and be a little more specific. And so, and I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. It's just which way do we want? We could have 2 overarching ones, or we could have multiple, like, more specific ones that perhaps can get checked off after some time. And the one other thing that I kind of wanted to throw out, and Mr. Strachan's addressed it a little bit already. I think I like the idea of maybe only having 3 active areas of focus or priorities, whatever we want to call them.
Well, haven't we done that with these 4 ideas in the first place?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we basically gone through, is we went through and we assigned 4 on this sheet here.
So we're talking about
You're talking about healthy neighborhoods.
Yeah,
right. The challenge with that is those are still very up here, but there's nothing defined, and that's why one of the discussions with the budget committee was, is this priorities or is this outcomes, right? Which brings us back to the discussion we had last hour, right? Last hour and a half was what kind of outcomes do we want? If you want to then define these in terms of your outcomes instead of priorities, it's like, what is the higher goal that you want to accomplish? And if the higher goal is, we want to improve affordable housing by X%, right? However you measure it, right? Then you can say that, and it doesn't really matter which committee is handling it, because there may be different aspects of moving that needle that you want to address.
So just really quick, just so I can clarify what I was trying to say. I wasn't advocating for larger kind of umbrella priorities. Just for example, the West Side planning, we had that as a priority for 2 years, but we really only focused on it, like intensely focused on it for 7 months, 8 months.
7 or 9, yeah.
Somewhere around there. And so what I'm saying is we could have our list of however many, and then we, in the bullpen, and then we pull 2 or 3 of them out and put significant focus on them until we get them over the hill, like we did with West Side planning, and then we take them off the list and we pull something else up. And anyway, it's different ways to structure it, and I'm not really advocating for one thing or another, but just ways of thinking of it.
Tell me why we can't take structured policy off, why that can be handled an issue.
Why that can't be what?
Why that can't be taken off. I thought we've done so much on it this year, I'm surprised you want to leave that on.
And you said why it can't be handled by leadership.
Oh, it can't be, it could be, it could be. I just didn't want to, what I was just saying is, I don't think we're done with it. Now, whether it's a priority or not, but I don't think we're done with it. There's some very specific things that I'd like to get done with it.
Yeah, and I would say this, because you are a council member, every one of you is a council member, and even if it's not a higher end council priority, you may have a desire to move the needle on some issue, and there's nothing to stop you from trying to continue to move that. But in terms of creating committees around something, to try and keep them to focus on the outcomes of the priorities that council wants.
Right.
Dave Sewell.
So it feels like we almost need two lists here. There's one that's kind of a to-do list that one or more council members is interested in doing, and then the smaller list over on the left there is things that the whole council has said, these are our top areas of focus.
Right, and I agree with you, and in fact, one of the comments in one of the emails we got back this week was that some of these may be to-do list items, right? And we can do that, we can do that individually. So what I would suggest to you is look through the documents that we handed out. This is just the ones that we received. Is there anything in here that's not here that you think we should be adding here? And then we can talk about where that fits in the hierarchy, if you will.
Well, I guess two things. If you want new stuff, there was the idea of emergency preparedness that came up. And committees, we don't have listed there the neighborhood committee.
That's right.
And we don't necessarily have any priorities. I mean, we had a priority to redo the ordinance, and I think we're well on the way to finishing that. But the committee will still meet, and it will still require some bandwidth.
Right, and that's because, part of that is because that's a program that council sponsors.
Right.
Right, it's part of your function that you've taken on.
I think parking should be on there.
Isn't parking part of this? And in some ways part of this? And this?
Perhaps, and so, yeah, you could say
And-
that, you could say that it's standalone. I mean, all of these things interact.
Can I suggest one that I hear over and over and over again in different ways said, and it's this one.
And parking is part of infrastructure.
That's right. Because this is one where you can worry about the CIP stuff. This is one where you can worry about the facilities. This is the one you can worry about so many of the infrastructure problems that are a priority. And now, as far as, I handed this out based on the same structure we had last time. It's this idea that, what is the relationship to the core values? What's the desired outcomes, and how are we going to measure it? Once we've established these priorities, we need to start, filling that out. What does it mean? We won't get it all done today, obviously.
So when we talk to our legislators, we talk somewhat infrastructure about how do we pay for our roads.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of things in that infrastructure category.
Yeah.
Personally, I see four things that I can wrap my arms around and really embrace and see a lot of work to do on that left-hand side.
Okay.
And I would like to incorporate the things that you consider new into those things.
Okay.
Personally, that's the way I can see that happening, because infrastructure, to me, that's our most critical need right now, is to deal with that. But that comes under budgeting, that comes under housing, that comes, it all can fit into, this is one thing that I saw with 2030, is that whatever we did, we related it back to this. And I think we can do the same thing with these things. We relate it always back to one of our priorities. And so as we talk about all of these things, if we keep, I can see four in there.
So there's four.
For me.
So if you remember the diagram we showed you before, where we had the vision, and then we had the general plan, and then we had really the budget, right? Or the budget, and your budget and your priorities should line up with all these things. So maybe your priorities are what part of what element of the general plan do you want to focus on? What element of the vision document do you want to focus on? Maybe it's higher level, maybe you build your committees around that structure.
So we're actually gonna be losing the DAPR committee or not? Is that gonna phase out?
It's going to phase out. We have a meeting scheduled in about 5 months to kind of review where we're at. So we're going to periodically
So
check
maybe
in and see how we're doing.
Put parentheses around DAPR because that'll not be as active as the
Right,
others?
yeah.
Wasn't there also a subcommittee meeting that we were going to have to review neighborhood committee proposal? Or am I mistaken on that?
Yeah, it's slipped my mind what the topic's supposed to be though.
Okay, but it's phasing out. It's and I agree that it shouldn't be part of our priorities.
So on the left, we have economic development is one of those four, but we don't have a committee focused on that, do we?
No, why don't we?
The committee wouldn't be effective, Dave.
You said it wouldn't?
I don't think it'd be effective.
But I'm just asking, what would be the best way to push that forward?
Approve what Echo brings to us.
Make sure they have the tools they need.
So much of that is underground, undercover that you're working on, and
Right.
you really can't discuss the committee until it comes to it. Then you usually go into a closed session before you agree.
That's a good point, George. We are the committee, aren't we?
Yeah, we are the committee.
Okay. Just wanted to.
Closed session.
And then you have, you have the RDA committee.
Right.
Working on RDA issues. And really, that committee, I mean, where you have committees, they can already focus on whatever priorities it wants, right? RDA is already going to have
some of
the issues that they're interested in.
Often they come to RDA executive committee before they come to closed session, actually.
Yeah, just playing devil's advocate here a little bit. I think where potentially a committee, and whether that's all of us or whatever, can be helpful with economic development is making sure that our Office of Economic Development understands what we're looking for, so that the proposals and the deals that they're working on, when they bring them to us, are the kind of deals that we're looking for. Just making sure, so it's not all just one way. I think we also need to communicate that way as well.
David, don't you think we do that in closed session? They ask us, is this something you want us to pursue? Are you willing to put the money or the time?
We do. That's reactive, and if we wanted to be proactive, maybe part of those closed sessions, or again, I'm not saying we should have it. I'm just saying.
I think we did that also. I think we did that also when we had the developers come in and talk about it. I remember having the commercial people. We've done this a couple of times. What can we do to help encourage some of those encouragement things? What can we do? And please know that we want this as a council. We've done that, I know, at least twice since I've been on the council. Major, what do we call these, retreats or whatever.
Well, David, I'm not saying it's worthy of discussion. I just think it's, I appreciate that we're talking about it.
Yeah, and that we got to talk.
Question I have is, so the Sustainability and Natural Resources Committee is not, it's an advisory committee to the mayor? Okay.
And I've asked them if they wanted to, I asked Don, are you interested in coming on board? And he said, absolutely not. He said, we like having their own freedom because, then they're able to implement and do things that if one of us was on it, assigned to it, we'd have to get it cleared through the city council and through the administration. So he said he's not interested in bringing those on as committees, assigned committees.
Well, they did present the possibility of a sustainability officer of some kind.
I'm just thinking out loud with you all, but I felt like with the
golf course thing, for example, my questions that I posed about sort of anticipated effects on water and so on,
everyone was sort of guessing, but we didn't really have anybody who from the city or for the city who advised in the same way that Brian gives us legal advice or Dixon gives us economic advice and so on. And I just wonder about that question too. I mean, maybe I'm throwing a wrench in the discussion here, but I mean, when it comes to housing, when it comes to economic development, when it comes to the water infrastructure, it seems like we're always in need of somebody who can say, I mean, if it's not a priority to us to say, well, we're going to approve different housing structures, but we don't care whether they have, solar panels, or we don't care if they are particularly well designed in terms of energy efficiency. We don't have any standards to require of them. Then I worry that we're just kind of being scattershot in our approach to the development of the city that's not addressing larger questions. So I'm just thinking of somebody in an advisory role who can provide some assistance in decision making. I'm not looking for, the person who has the ultimate power, who can say yes or no, but somebody who can give us informed assessments of different situations.
Mr. Jarvis did propose hiring a sustainability coordinator, if you recall.
What's that?
Mr. Jarvis did suggest.
Yeah, no, that's what I was saying. He did. I mean, and that's a.
Yeah. Dave and then Kay.
Just, there are two sister committees, aren't there? Isn't there one that's made up of community members, and then there's another one that's made up of city
Employees.
staff?
City employees.
So do they have different names? Remind me of what their names are?
I'm meeting with the city employee one next week.
Okay, anyway, but there are actually
But
two
neither one of them has somebody who, I mean, here and there we've had experts on the city committee, for example, but not really systematically making sure that we've had somebody who had a background in architecture, we had somebody who had a background in water, but that's about it.
But don't we have that in our own system, in our public works, and in Gary and Dave and their engineers? Aren't those the guys that you're asking to be on the committee because they know how to do it?
And, well, maybe you're right. I mean,
know.
is that?
I think too, George, a little bit, a lot of those things, the example you gave, like if we're going to stress housing and then water requirements, a lot of that is in the National Building Code, that those are quite controlled. And unless we want to strike out on our own above and beyond that, I don't think that's, we don't need a specialist that controls that, because that's very specific on equipment and everything we put into that. So at least that example, now you probably have other examples that require somebody, but for that example, I'm not sure what role they would play anyway.
Well, the question's asked partly out of ignorance, so I'm more than happy to be, but I didn't quite understand how that worked in terms of the process.
I think a lot of the times we forget our role as the council. We are the committee often, and we rely on the experts that we've got. We've got our public works director, we've got our power board directors, and they're coming to advise us and give us. They're the ones that know how to do it. What do you guys think? And we are those committees that you're talking about, and we are relying on those experts that we have.
So I've looked through the list that we've got here. There's a number of items on here that really are to-do list items, and a lot of the stuff you have still is encapsulated by kind of where you're at on certain things. I'm also going to suggest to you that the general plan, we've had our first round of comments from the neighborhood chairs and from the council members, some of the council members and some of the neighborhood chairs, and we're reformulating or structuring what we've got, and within another week or two, we should have available to you the list of all the implementation steps that are in the draft. And that may help you as you think about where you want to spend your time advancing those areas.
Are you saying that the general plan could come off that list? We're far enough along.
Yeah, I've already crossed it out. But the 2050 is another area that you guys have expressed, you council members have expressed a desire after the general plan is done to then look at updating 2050.
You crossed it off, I don't see a line through it.
General plan?
It's very light.
It ended up being the negative white line through it. So.
And with respect to Dave, I agree with the structured policy, and that doesn't mean we're done, but it means that we can.
Right, in my mind, I think what's helpful.
I'm fine with it coming off because I feel like we're gravitating towards kind of larger areas and less, I mean, I'm quite shocked that we're not talking about parking. To me, parking is a very specific area that needs a lot of focus. And sure, it relates to a lot of other things, but if we're trying to take a step higher than that, I think structured policy is a to-do. I almost feel like all of those things are almost could be to-dos. And what's the difference between the smaller to-dos and the bigger to-dos? I thought they were just higher priority. But yeah, I agree that structured policy doesn't belong on that list as we currently have it constituted.
Well, you might even argue, for instance, here, zoning compliance last year, that committee came up and said they identified a strategic plan. You have a zoning committee, you could essentially just task the zoning committee with implementing the strategic plan, and then as a council, take that off and focus on other things, but let that committee continue to move things along.
And I see your argument, and I think that's a really good thing to think about. I personally think that zoning compliance is big enough, important enough, and is not far enough along that I'm willing to take it off. I still think it needs a lot of focus of the whole council, even if it's being guided by the zoning committee. But that's just my one single opinion on that.
That's fine.
And I would also say that anything we add or subtract sends a message. And, you know, the fact that we're moving general plan, which will soon be done, and then like we're going to do Vision 2050. So it's not like that's really subtracting anything. And the public doesn't know or care about what we're doing on some of these committees, but they would notice, like, oh, zoning compliance is off the radar. So I would be reluctant.
Okay.
So Cliff, what do we have left? We have zoning.
You have zoning, you
housing,
have zoning, economic development, housing, budgeting, structured policy.
David said to take structured policy out.
I still feel like we're confusing priorities with to-dos, though. I mean, it seems to me that a priority isn't, zoning compliance isn't a priority so much as a task that is in midstream that still needs attention. I mean, can we have a list of priorities that's relatively small and then have a document of our 10 or 12 main things we want to tackle?
That's why we boiled it down to these four areas before. And then
Cut it in half, that's
everything
quite
else.
an accomplishment.
Cut it down to 4, yeah.
So I guess I'm just confused about what we're trying to do here. We're trying to come up with those 4?
Well, those 4, I see those as kind of higher themes, right? Higher, kind of a part of the higher goals that you want to accomplish, but there's nothing really specific in those statements.
So which do you want us to be, when you say what are our priorities for the next 2 years?
So I'm asking you.
How many are we trying to do? How many, what's the number we're looking at? And if it's a smaller number, then we're talking bigger picture. If it's a larger number, then we're talking more detail.
I think it's maybe a matter of semantics. To me, these are more goals than priorities. These are the things we want to accomplish. And, you know, they do take priority over other things because we're going to spend time to accomplish them, and they're goals because they have different objectives and measurable outcomes.
Of all the issues facing the city, what does council want to spend its time doing?
Infrastructure.
What's that? Infrastructure.
I like to move that one maybe in place of budgeting can go over. They're just so all interrelated to me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and often I say that budget and CIP
Exactly.
are really closely.
You can't do one without the other.
Wayne, do you have any thoughts on all this? Putting you on the spot.
No, I think you're exactly on the right track. So fewer is better, and again, when you get one done, you can always come back and revisit and
So you really
throw
could
new
say
into
with
the mix.
You really could say with the budget committee, for example, make infrastructure put it under the bailiwick of the budget committee to focus on. But see, but before I get to you, but the truth is, that's something we want to focus on, just like we had to create a strategic plan, but this was a whole different thing. We were trying to get the budget shifted a little bit to focusing on some of council's priorities as well, right? Council's outcomes, and it's evolved. Dave, Gary?
I just had a question then about, are we turning things to the committees to help us determine outcomes? Is that what we're doing here? We're saying, all right, we're dealing with housing. Now, the zoning and the housing committees, are they gonna help us establish some outcomes? Are we gonna tell them the outcomes?
That's a structural question. You could go that route.
Well, the zoning committee has the strategic plan in place, so it has a blueprint. If we want to task these committees with specific things, I mean, housing, last year we explored a variety of things, we had some accomplishments, but if the council wants to give each committee some direction and say, these are the things that we're really interested in you solving and looking at this year, that would be helpful, rather than just leaving it up to the committee to figure it out.
Yeah, and that's what we did, that's what you did.
So I think, again, it kind of, there's no right way necessarily to do this, but it depends on what level that we're talking about. I almost feel like, as we narrow this down to 4, I almost feel like we're coming back to these, which again, isn't necessarily a bad thing. Healthy environment, responsible government, vibrant community, thriving commerce. You can almost take those things. I mean, economic development, are we ever going to take that off? Or is it, and I think that it is because it's a priority, but are we talking about?
It's a constant battle.
And it is. So I think we're shifting more to that high level, which again is good, and we've already done that once. But after we did this 2 years ago, I think we went into kind of our to-do list and said, what of our to-do lists? And then they're a little bit bigger than, I mean, zoning compliance came up with a whole strategic plan of to-do items, but I mean, it was a very specific thing that we have a problem with zoning compliance in our city. We want to really make a change in the next, at the time we were talking just a single year, and we added it to that list. I feel like, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Or maybe we create a third column of to-do lists, of things, to-do items. Again, no right or wrong way, but the higher level that we go, I don't think we'll ever check these things off. And I think they become what we call goals, and there's labeled values here, and I think the terminology is all kind of jumbled, but I think we're getting into this realm right now, which is okay, but I think it'd be nice if we were a little clearer on what we're trying to get to.
And do we do that by looking at problems? Is that the question? So we got a parking problem, we've got an infrastructure problem, we have problems in emergency preparedness, and so then we take those things and go back to our vision and make them, or I'm curious as to what direction we're going, from the vision down to the problem. But we're all dealing with problems. That's what we're
always dealing with problems.
Yeah, and if we keep them onto that vision.
Which bug do you want to fix?
I think I go backwards sometimes.
So it's either you create new committees and say, this is your focus, or you say, well, we're going to handle infrastructure by putting it down into the budget committee, and they need to focus on the different problems in the CIP and the infrastructure and figure out how we're going to pay for it, and also maybe set some priorities. So it's one or the other, a new committee or task it into the existing committees. I do have a question. I wrote on here, one of my priorities would be to work closely with the UTA to make the best of the new BRT and supporting affected businesses and realigning the bus routes to better serve the community. I don't know that we have to have a committee, or if there is a committee that is going to handle something like that other than the TMAC. And that's probably the one that should. That's a big deal.
But we're gonna get a lot of feedback on that from our communities. I mean, at least I am all the time. So, some sort of communication needs to go on so that we're giving them.
Wayne, where does the decision points on BRT stand right now? If council wants to express an opinion on things, where does that go now?
I think one suggestion I'd make is to have UTA come in and make a presentation on their plans for implementing BRT and post-BRT. I think you'll find that they're well on their way to realigning the bus routes and those kinds of things to interconnect with BRT. It's pretty high priority for them. You know, the BYU UVU deal was pretty substantial in terms of encouraging ridership. There are other options they're looking at, including some federal grants to discount or make entirely free riding the BRT during an initial time period, which would supplement the BYU and UVU deal for those not affiliated with the two universities in the community. And again, I think they'd be thrilled to report on where they're at. I think you'll probably find that I don't know if you can entirely check the box off, but I think you could say, well, come back in 3 months and let us know how you're doing.
That would be extremely helpful. I think it was for me. I just know it's a big issue in my community.
Yeah.
And knowing the information well and being able to answer questions and to provide feedback from the community to the UTA.
Yeah. So
all of that, those lines of communication.
Yeah, I'd be thrilled to do that. Absolutely.
Dave would have it.
Yeah. So I think that's an excellent example of what I think we should have. I think we should have a list somewhere of things like that, a to-do list. Maybe that's all it is. It's a to-do list. Having a plan for the sewage treatment plant is, I think, another issue. Yes, it fits under infrastructure, and yes, we could give it to the budget committee and all that, but I think in the next 3 months, we need to solidify that plan. And so maybe that's one of our 3 active to do. And maybe after one meeting with UTA, we can take the item we just talked about and we can pull it off our active and move it into the back burner where we just kind of monitor it and we move something else up there. But I think as leadership, at least I think it would be helpful to have a list of new things that we want to accomplish, and then we can always pull from and say, okay, we've got that. What's the next most urgent thing on our to-do list? Okay, let's pull that one up.
And then we can always relate it back to this.
Yes.
Right.
One thing that we're doing, and I appreciate Cliff jumping right on this, is getting the department heads to come in and talk about this. This gives us the information that we need so that we can start going. We're talking about infrastructure. Well, that has to do with economic development and housing and all these other things. But he's going to start getting department heads to come in, talk about their needs, and where we can help them in the budgeting process and supporting them.
So I have a suggestion for you, but let's hear, Larry's been waving his hand for a bit.
I apologize for interrupting you, but I just got a suggestion. If you started from what you've identified as values, the healthy environment, vibrant community, the thriving commerce, and said, in each of those areas, what are the biggest impediments that we face? What's slowing us down from making progress in those areas? And what actions can we take in relation to those impediments in the next 2 years or the next year? That might move you forward. And some of that will show up on what you've identified, but starting from what you want to accomplish and saying what's keeping us from doing that may help you identify what you want to do next.
Do we want to take that on as maybe a whole, because we're running out of time for today, but do you want to maybe take that on as a kind of a homework assignment? By those things, and then we'll revisit this in a week or two?
There's possible impediments, but I think there's also a lot of things that we are actively engaged in already that fit under these. We just need to categorize them and see where they fit.
Wayne, could a council committee help public works at all? I don't think so. In my mind, they're working full bore, they're gonna bring tough to us as they have it. I just think we kind of get in the way.
I think there's a couple of pieces to this. One, I think things like the sewer treatment plant and so on are going to be, they are self-evident. The council's going in large measure to react to realities and try to identify the best solutions. I would suggest you focus on things, one, that are legislative in nature or budget related in nature, and two, where your proactivity will make a substantial difference. Again, it raises the consciousness of the community to it, puts a lot of, lets the administration know where you're headed. I don't think I would waste my priorities, if you have a limited number of them, on things that are going to happen as a matter of course. They are high priorities for you, but in terms of where you're going to put your proactive emphasis, that's probably a lost opportunity.
Yeah, I'm looking to Dave and the administration to come up with
Sure.
what we can do with public works.
Yeah, we're going to obviously bring you recommendations. Now, whether there's some value in running those by a committee or an ad hoc group before it comes to the full council, there might be some value in that, so that a finished product arrives at the council that's already been vetted by two or three assigned council members.
The whole council has to be involved.
Absolutely, but again, I'm just suggest there could be value in doing that with a committee, but in terms of trying to drive the project, I think it's going to be driven under any scenario.
I just think that's so important.
Reality is driving it.
I would not be on a committee that would not be part of the whole council on the sewage treatment plant. I think the whole council is.
I think our greatest involvement is going to be the budget. How are we going to pay for it?
Yes.
And then making some decisions overall. So
And if you think about, go back to vision and say the general plan, one of the you have an administration who's already doing the operational stuff for the city. At the end of the day, council's value, biggest value, in addition to the decision making and things that go with that, is helping to set kind of a vision for the city, the things that it's the quality of life things that make people love the city they live in, or not, right? So it is the Provo River revitalization. It is a regional sports park idea, things that people start feeling pride in their communities, that gives people their sense of satisfaction with it. And that's probably where council could spend some of its time.
And I agree with that. Let's come up with I like what George was talking about here. I like the idea of the impediments of where we're going. Maybe if council members could come up and see, I see these as impediments, and these are things that we can work on. Maybe that's our homework. I'd like to get down to the homework assignment here and figure out what would.
I mean, are we in agreement that the 4 values as they're listed here are still our 4 values? I mean, I don't see any reason to change those, and then if we group these different to-dos underneath those 4.
Point of clarification. So I see the to-dos differently than these items on the left there. I don't know what we call those priorities. I keep getting that confused with budget priorities, so I almost prefer areas of focus for the council.
In some ways, Dave, these are like policy priorities, right?
Okay, if you put that prefix on, then that.
Because that's what you've done. For instance, you've identified a lot of impediments in the community that relate to zoning compliance issues, right? So council goes, spends some time, the committee spends some time, and then comes up with some ideas, takes it to council, and you adopted a strategic plan for zoning compliance. 9 areas to focus the administration's attention on fixing them. And there are some of those things that are legislative fixes that the committee's having to create the policy around, bring it back to council and adopt it. That to me is actually a really good example of what a policy priority for a council should be, right?
you're not necessarily going to fix the potholes, but, you know, maybe you have to create a standard for fixing the potholes.
So the other part of my comment was I feel like Vision 2050 should maybe be the 5th item on that list, because as a council, we have the responsibility to look out way in the future, decades in the future, and I know that's a joint responsibility with the administration, but I would like to see that effort continue to move ahead as an important area of focus.
Yeah, so I would agree that the general plan / Vision 2050 as a main focus as we try to keep our focus on planning. I had a question, you know, to-dos, I like a to-do list. And you have to decide who's best suited, the administration or the council, a committee or a department. And if we have somebody that's already well on top of it, then certainly we don't need to do their job or set up a new committee. But the nature of the to-do will determine who does it.
Sure, yeah.
So what are we writing here? What's, are we going
Right
back to the
now-
homework, or what are we?
Right now, if we were ending right now, what I would suggest to you is that, what I would tell you is that I'll come back to you with a summary of these items and some of the homework, and then start listing it, making a to-do list. But I think really what we need to do is figure out, what does that mean for the council? And then when you want to try to accomplish it, how are you going to structure your committees accordingly? Because that's the next question that we're dealing with next week is the council members being appointed to various committees, right? And then what are you going to do in those committees?
Remind me, which committee was the name of the committee that was doing the general plan this time around?
Council Policy Governance Committee.
So we keep that one in the mix.
Possibly. I don't like the name of it though, but. Right? And then there's rules, right? Later in the day, my handwriting gets worse. But I think where we are right now is you've got some priorities up here, and I think one thing would help is for us to get you the updated list on general plan implementation steps and some of those goals, and see how they play into your thinking.
So we kind of made a to-do list.
Yep. I'm just not going to write them all down here.
Right. And then there was the other thought that what are the impediments to getting to where we want to go?
Yeah. Yes. We'll create something. We'll send an email out tomorrow for you. And then if we've got time, I'm hoping to put on the agenda for next week a follow-up to this, probably very short, but maybe just touch on this a little bit. And the question is, do you want to come back in 2 weeks from now and have another retreat where you really and continue to hash it out, to think through it?
I'm still, I don't know that we've come up with a big idea yet, and I'm not sure I understand. Other than coming up with a list of to-dos, I don't know what else I'm being asked to do. I'm confused. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be obtuse. I'm just not. I mean, if these are our values, our 4 values that are guiding us, and all we need to do is come up with a list of impediments and/or ongoing projects that we're doing, and then figure out where they go in the committees. That seems pretty straightforward. But if you're asking for a policy priority, which is different than these values, see,
Yes, but I think if you answer the question, what are the impediments to get to those values? That's going to help you identify your policy priorities.
It's going to give me a list that's 15
It may.
items long, which is my to-do list.
It may.
That's where I'm confused.
Yeah.
It may be a little bit different. I mean, it depends how you look at it. There's the to-do list, and then what is maybe keeping me from getting those things done, or why are they not done and for the last 20 years?
Right. And how many of those are just little tiny things that are like tweaks versus major policy initiatives? Like that zoning compliance.
So
was
we're looking for major
shift
policy priorities
Yeah,
for that category.
for that category. Dave Sewell?
So let me take a stab at it here, the way I look at it. So I see 5 things on the left that I personally agree with as policy priorities. The zoning compliance, Vision 2050, economic development, housing, and budgeting for outcomes, budgeting for priorities. I think we also have a to-do list that is going to have both an active and an inactive column. And some of these priorities or policy priorities, I guess probably all of them will have something on the to-do list that's in the active column. But there are other things on that to-do list that from time to time will slide over into the active column as 1 or 2 council members or a committee works on it and then it's ready to go. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at that. And then I'm also looking at this whole thing as being different and independent of budget priorities, and that's a whole huge thing that we haven't even dived into yet.
Right. So, I wasn't here 2 years ago when you started creating the priorities, but it seems to me it took several months of effort to get there.
It did.
Yeah.
It's like 4 different work meetings, I think, something like that.
So
yes, we probably need another.
Yeah, well, I knew we would, but that's my point, right, is that it took some time, it took a little bit of pain and thinking and probably some small measure of suffering to get to it, but we'll get there.
So, you know, on the new list, parking, how much of that, or most of it, can be handled by our new parking czar? Or is there more to it that we need to address that he's not going to be addressing?
It's a good question. We could ask him.
It just depends on what's on our...
Remember, he's only got so much bandwidth as well, right? He's got
Exactly.
his 40 hours a week and council just adopted a strategic plan that he's supposed to work on, and where does the council and the mayor want him to focus on his efforts?
Right, so a lot of the parking could be handled, in theory, by Matt. Infrastructure, depending on what we want to do there, is potentially already in process with the departments working on that, but Chris Blinzinger, he's over...
Chris would love your attention.
Yeah, I think he would.
So. But I think the key is to think about these things again from a policy perspective, whether it requires legislation or policy setting, and of course, spending is policy, right? Your budget is policy. Where you spend your money is where your priorities are.
The water treatment issue is only a policy issue as it relates to budgeting. My understanding is, would that be fair to say? I mean, we're not,
in
we
part,
don't need to create legislation to say that we need to do this. We know we need to do it.
right?
So
So
we
there's
just need
state
to come up with a
standards.
means of doing it, which is through budgeting.
Right.
So that's not really a policy, even though it's a priority for us to do it urgently. It's not necessarily something that requires
Right,
legislation.
but what could be a policy priority is again budget related, and that is to say, if you were looking at all your different infrastructures, again, part of the CIP and budget, right, is well, a number of years ago, the feeling was that the city wasn't spending enough money on its infrastructure, and over time, the city has stepped that up. That's been a policy change based on a focus on spending dollars there.
So it'd be helpful to have a motion to adopt those 5 policy priorities so we can move on.
Okay.
I make a motion that we adopt those policy priorities that we've left on the list.
Which 5?
Well, I guess we did zone compliance,
Economic,
economic development,
Vision 2050.
housing,
Housing.
And budget.
Budget.
Mr. Stewart, could I make a friendly slight modification to the motion or suggestion?
oh, heavens, yes. I'm just trying to get closer.
Well, that we label it tentative, because I do think everyone needs to go home and think about it. There may be other ideas that we come up with.
Yeah, I almost think the closure for today could be more of, are we gonna get together in 2 weeks, or are we gonna just roll it into the meetings? I feel like there's still a lot to.
2 weeks.
2 weeks?
To think about, so.
Do you want another 2 to 6, or do you want a breakfast meeting, or what do you want to do?
But just to finish up, I'll second that motion as a way of sort of providing a starting point, not an end point.
Yep.
So,
Okay. And we'll try and summarize this and get to you by Thursday. Yeah, by Thursday as to where we're at with all this.
And also what you're expecting from us for the next meeting.
Okay. That's the whole.
Will that retreat be mostly focused on this, so we could do like a 2-hour, 4 to 6 or something like that?
Yeah, I
4
think-
hours, we don't need 2 hours.
Yeah, I think we can. And then part of the question, I think, too, is to keep thinking about the big idea. Something to deal with the budgeting for outcomes.
We can have a breakfast retreat where we can have some food.
We could do that.
that would help.
So let's deal with the question, but I don't get to call for votes.
Okay. Those in favor, you want to state your motion one more time? Tentative, agreeing to 5, you'd state that, George.
Those 5 statements as tentative policy
Right.
priorities.
Okay. Those in favor?
Okay.
Unanimous?
So part of the homework for that is then going to be, we'll send this out, is to start filling that document in that says, you know, how does this relate to the goals? What are the outcomes you want? What are the measures that you see for those policy priorities? Okay. So the next issue then is, do you want to meet in 2 weeks, the 26th? Or what's 2 weeks from today?
The 30th.
30th, thank you.
Morning or evening?
End of the day or end of the day?
It's easier at the end of the day.
I have a class every Tuesday and Thursday morning, so early morning's not good for me. It's at 8 a.m., but
I'm sorry.
it's pretty fixed.
I hate the 8 a.m.
The
classes.
students hate it, it's not wrong for me. So afternoons are a little better, unless it's later morning.
So we just plan on 4 to 6?
Okay. And we'll keep it to 2 hours.
Yes. Right. Okay, we'll set that up. Thank you. John and Dustin. You want the podium? You want the screen, podium? What do you
I
need?
think they've got the calendar they can pull up. What Dustin and I wanted to do, it is the 16th of January, which means that we're starting our budget process for fiscal 2018. And one of the things that we wanted to talk with the council about, last year we did things a little differently. There was a request from council, and administration was supportive in meeting with the council staff about every 2 weeks during the budget process. That gave us an opportunity to share with them where we're at and what things we're facing, and for them to just be a little bit more informed. And the idea was to help try to have a little bit more information sharing so that the council didn't feel like they were getting the budget and seeing it for the first time on the first Tuesday in May. And so what we want to do is we kind of want to go through the calendar, and then we're looking for your feedback to see if last year helped, or if we want to kind of try to repeat what we did last year, if there's other things that we could change. And so that's kind of what we're going to do. So I'm going to have Dustin kind of walk through the calendar. Anybody can ask any questions, and then we'd love to have input and see if that's going to work. What we don't want to do is have a surprise at the end saying, oh, I wish we'd have done this or that. We'd rather talk about it now rather than after the fact. So Dustin, do you want to walk through that?
So we are well into January, and we've already distributed the capital improvement packets for fiscal 2019. Beginning in February, we'll actually go over the internal administration review of those packets before they're presented to you in their final form of that CIP report in February. February is also where we're going to start the operation and maintenance, the O&M portion of our budget. Those involve sending out our payroll sheets, and we're going to hopefully use a new tool that integrates with Kayenta. It's a web tool that the departments will be able to enter their budgets in directly and facilitate some more back and forth with the departments. We will deliver that 5-year capital improvement packet to you in March. In previous years, we've gone over that in the work session. I imagine we do something pretty similar this year. Again, this is the standard format. If there are changes, we can discuss those. In April, we will go over our recommendations for the new operation maintenance budget, review, I guess, any key issues that we see on the horizon of things that we might include or things that we think might be of concern. If there's revenue projections or anything like that we feel the need to share, we will share that with you. And that will prepare those documents to be delivered to the municipal council. There's a fair amount of work that goes into that preparation, which is part of why we're having this meeting today, to try and get your sense on what changes we might want to make to it to accommodate any of your requests, because getting those requests in April will be much harder to meet them than if they were given to us today, for instance. So May, we will present that budget to you and discuss it internally with our directors as well. And then in June is when we actually go through the adoption process. We, in the past, tentatively adopt it and then adopt it later at the end of June. If there is a property tax increase, that property tax truth and taxation hearings would be held in July with the actual vote in August. So we would operate under a tentative budget for that first portion.
So recently we talked about possibly allocating money for Nevada Avenue. And didn't know what the council needs to do or what the process is to make sure that that's a possibility.
Items like that will probably be discussed during our CIP review as they come up on whether it's an item that we need to do as an going forward, or if there's changes to do this year, or there's I think some options to discuss that with the department.
And the other thing I would add too is that
Scope and scale of that before we get back to you.
Yeah, in the CIP budget, if there's changes or recommendations, those changes can still be incorporated in the budget document. It's not too late. But yeah, that's an example of something that's good that we're aware of.
So are we assuming that the water treatment plant will be in the CIP budget?
I think definitely Dave Decker's here as well, but I know they're hoping in the spring to come back with some updates, and with the information that we have, we're going to be as proactive as we possibly can to get that in the plan.
What do you think, Dave? Are we making?
Well, you'll have a pretty good idea by the time, in fact, our consultants, as I said, we need to make a decision by May of this year, so it's actually before the budget's adopted. So you're going to have a pretty good idea even when the budget is first presented to you in March. We're going to have some good, solid ideas of the direction that we're going to go.
Yeah.
And those things interplay so much with opportunities for tax increases, property taxes, because that's going to be huge if we're dealing with this. And so how do we deal with both situations when we're not sure exactly yet?
Well, property tax increases aren't going to cover anywhere near.
No, you can't build a sewer treatment plant with a property tax.
But I do believe the legislature, there's some appetite in the legislature for adjusting for inflation on the property tax, and whether that goes through this year or if it's just the first year of that discussion, we don't know.
You're saying at the state level?
At the state level.
Authorizing cities to take an inflation adjustment without having to go through truth and taxation. It's kind of the general concept that's being floated around.
That was I read in the paper that was the big issue in Sandy, I think, the Sandy mayoral race hinged on this very question.
Yep.
And person who won had sort of said the adjustment was needed, and anyway.
It would be huge.
So along that line, it seems like property tax, we always end up deciding that way down at the very end.
Yep. That's the nature of it.
Could we maybe try to come to some kind of agreement on that early on so you could plan?
And because this Board of Education is going to go out for another huge bond in about 4 or 5 years, similar to the one they just went out with 4 or 5 years ago. They're on a 10-year cycle.
Will we be coming that this year?
No, in 4 years, but I'm just saying,
They probably will be coming back, could be coming back
Yeah.
with an O&M
yes.
tax increase, property tax increase this year. It's being discussed at the school board level.
We surely don't want to do it at the same time as the school board.
No. Don't want to do that, but then we don't want to miss our window of opportunity. If we want to take it, we've got to jump in and take it.
Well, since we're on the subject, so I have two suggestions. One is if the council is amenable, let's have this discussion really early on and decide whatever.
Absolutely, I think that's imperative.
Okay. And the second, I'm in favor of the inflation adjustment, no more, no less, that they're talking about, so.
I think it would have a lot of, it would be great for the public and everything to know that the administration and the council decided early on in the budget process that this is something that we want to do, and I think that would add a lot of support and increase the possibility of it taking place.
And quite honestly, I think we need to do it in tandem. If we don't, then it just sends a bad deal. Because then they say, well, they say you can do it, why can't you? So I think we need to talk about it together and make sure we're on the same page with this.
The issue would bring it up after the legislative session to see what they do.
When does that end?
March 11th or 9th or something like that area. Yeah.
Well, I think we need to bring it up at least by then.
Probably after the session, so we know
What they decided, whether they're going to do with the inflation.
But that only pertains to the question of whether or not a truth and taxation hearing is necessary. It doesn't necessarily.
Say if you're going to implement it or
I mean, we could start the conversation, it seems, before that. But if we made a decision, we'd need to know what they had decided on to determine whether or not that affected us.
I think there's a lot of conversation. I just see what we're talking about with rates and what that's going to do to our community as far as sewer rates and those kinds of things. And so we deal with those things. But we got to look, what are the other needs besides sewer treatment plant? And are we focusing on those?
So, one of the big things of a prior administration was not to raise, it was Lewis that didn't want to raise utility fees. And I think he's still upset that we have raised them. But it's inevitable. You have to pay, and you have to consider the cost of inflation. And if we don't adjust property taxes in the same way and just let them year after year not adjust in a normal, semi-painless, because nothing's painless.
And I agree with you, and we do that also through the transfer in some ways. That transfer has kept us from having to deal with that, because that transfer has gone up every year.
Right, but we're not keeping pace. That's the
I
problem.
get that, I get that.
It has to do with it's one of the pieces that impacts our 10-year plan and being sustainable is by not having that property tax adjusted for inflation.
It's one of the legs of the stool. And if we don't adjust for inflation, that leg kind of shrills.
And I get that. And I also love your closing the gap on that, the thing, so.
Yeah, as I recall, this in the Sandy case, prior mayor refused to make that adjustment, but that put added pressure on the need for more retail. And the perception of the community was that Sandy was losing its character as a family town because it was just becoming commercialized at every turn. And the mayor who came in said we needed to make this adjustment to relieve some of the pressure on the need for all that retail so that they could
It was an interesting,
So if you appeal to neighborhoods
Yeah.
and community.
yeah. I mean,
They
and
were
it's
balancing the
obviously, if the communication isn't done well, it
Good example.
it can be spun.
Good
as
example
we
of
go,
priorities
all kinds
too.
of ways,
What
yeah.
are your priorities and where do you want to go?
So someone was elected campaigning on a tax increase.
Inflation adjustment.
Yeah, I don't know.
Little distinction there.
Yeah.
Responsible budgeting.
I'm all for it.
Again, comparing property taxes to fees, fees apply to 100% of the population, property tax apply to 50% of the population. So to say we'll do property tax instead of fee increases, I think is
Oh, no, not instead.
or less fee increases because we're doing property tax. I have a real problem with that. Because of the distribution of the different taxing entities.
I don't think we're proposing that we reduce one or the other.
Well, there was some argument last year if we increase property tax, we maybe won't increase fees as fast. I have a problem with that.
Gotcha.
So our question, did last year's process help in keeping the council informed? And would you like us, are you okay if we follow that same practice, or do you feel like there's more that could be done as far as the council being involved?
Will you still have the detail you had last year or more?
Oh, yeah, well, that's not going to change.
That was huge.
That was huge.
I think one thing that we're talking about doing is again, having the departments come earlier, starting in February, and start talking about their stuff so that we're not all jamming it into June trying to get it done. It won't be a surprise. That'll be new this year compared to last year.
I think we're supportive with that, aren't we?
So,
yeah. This discussion today is helpful too. I mean, the more discussions we can have earlier on so we're aware of things is important.
I think also, one of the things that was helpful last year was the supplemental list. It just, by the time we saw it last year, it was in the budget, it was in May, June, and hopefully having it earlier will help in those discussions as well.
Yeah, I think from the standpoint of departmental needs, I think you'll see that again. The supplemental list for us is a really key factor in helping the mayor define what her budget recommendation is going to be.
Right.
I don't think we want to take away flexibility for the mayor to make her best recommendation.
Right.
So again, I think we'll probably want to see that be a little more generic earlier in the process. We're happy to give you everything that wasn't funded when we deliver the budget to you, so you can see what's in and what's out. But I don't think we want to take the flexibility away from the mayor to make her best recommendation.
Right.
So, but we're happy to give you early warning on stuff.
I think though council has expressed a desire to know what those decisions were, like this is, we funded these, we didn't fund these.
Yep. We're happy to deliver that with the budget.
Right.
So, but yeah, I think you'll see again I mean, if you're listening to the presentation by the department directors, there should be no surprises on the supplemental list.
Right.
One of the challenges that we have too is that with the budget being as complex as it is and having as many moving parts as it has, we really don't know until towards the end of April exactly what we feel like is going to be available for supplemental requests.
Right.
And even going into June, you know, we're looking at a revenue forecast and sometimes particularly sales tax and things. And so it's just moving parts, but we'll keep you involved. But that is one of the other challenges too.
Last year, I called the department and asked if I could reduce their supplemental request by $5,000, just so I could balance the budget.
So
John, when do you have the carryover list?
No, we provided it for last year. Now,
Post-audit.
it'll be post-audit. It will be September timeframe.
There's really nothing you can do prior to because you don't know it's going to be.
A lot of them are open POs that will be in
Will
progress.
be closed before the audit.
This was really helpful, this is nice to get another one.
Yeah, and we're planning on coming back in a council meeting in September-ish, early October to share that with the council. Yes.
Would there be a way that before we get to that point in May where you present the, you know, who's getting the increases and who's getting the cuts, to have a little bit of back and forth on that, just with the council?
We could talk about it again. My reluctance is that I don't want to shift the balance of power by doing that. And so again, I want the mayor to have maximum flexibility in what she recommends so the budget reflects her priority, which is her statutory responsibility, give you one that is her best recommendation. And so I'm a little reluctant to go into much detail until she's reached a conclusion about what's going to be in the recommended budget. Certainly, once the budget recommendation is there, we're happy to disclose any of those parts of the process. But again, I think we'd rather keep council's feedback at a pretty general level, kind of focusing on trends and key priorities for you, so she's aware before she makes her decisions about what's important to you. But again, that's one factor in a variety of others that she has to consider in making her final recommendation. And again, as John suggests, it's pretty fluid right up until the end. There's some things that are in early will come out late, and some things that are out early will come in late. And again, but it's just it's a nature of as say, a lot of the moving parts, the different revenue sources play into that equation. Again, it's just, so I'm a little reluctant to do very much too early because I don't want it to hamper her flexibility. That makes sense?
I would support what Wayne's saying on that, having had to do that for 4 years.
But I simply think by virtue of having the departments come in early and talking about their needs and stuff, that will be a step we haven't had. And I think, like Wayne says, if we're listening and we're asking the right questions, we'll get a real good sense of what their concerns are.
So the flip side of that coin is, and I don't know what the right balance here is either, but so after May, when you bring the budget, then if the council looks at it and says, well, we want to make a big cut here, or that, you recall that can be
pretty painful. Yep.
Hard on the relationship, and so that's why I'm just looking for some way to.
Well, I think again, from our perspective, the earlier we hear from the council about your key budget priorities, the easier it is to put them in the budget. I mean, ideally, at the end of the day, we'd like to bring you a budget that you would adopt without, because we will have answered all your questions in the budget document. But again, I don't want to take the flexibility away from the mayor to do what she feels she needs to do in recommending a budget to you. Obviously, we don't go to the other extreme, which is where the legislature is, where the governor's budget means zero to the legislature, and they craft their own budget from the get-go, and we don't want to get to that point either. And so again, it's finding that happy medium.
Just put a plug in, possibly with a 2-year budget cycle, then we can still have that flexibility in the timing, but then still give the council more time. So that might be one advantage of a 2-year cycle.
So, when the new CIP comes out, will new additions, new projects be highlighted in any particular way? The last time, the only way to figure it out was they didn't have a number, they said new.
We can make a better effort to identify those to you, but largely they're organized by priority. So higher priority, and that's just the way that we've done it in the past. The highest priority items are at the top of the list and going down successively. So a newer project might be anywhere in that range, but like I said, there's no reason why we couldn't identify those new ones on top of that.
If that's helpful to you, we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I mean, because, if you did your homework last year and you know what's already being passed along, I like to focus on what's new.
You just put N by it?
Yeah, I mean, the question is what constitutes new, right? If there is a significant funding change to an ongoing project, is that something you want to be highlighted or not? And there's a lot of potential moving parts.
There was, I don't know if there was 50, but there was a whole bunch of brand new projects that were added to the queue over and above any changes to existing ones.
Right. I don't think we'll see that number this time. It's largely because we kind of created a new category, which was projects we don't have any funding for, but we think are important. The CIP has traditionally not been really a visionary document. It's been very practical, driven by master plans and those kinds of things. So last year, we asked the departments to, regardless of what was in the master plan, come in and tell us what they see coming down the pike that's really important. So even if they were beyond the 5 years, we wanted to make sure that we were identifying those. So I think you'll see the number of new projects will not be as great this year, because again, we've sort of now extended beyond the 5-year plan by throwing some things out there that are beyond 5 years, but we see as coming down the pike. So again, I don't think you'll see quite the number, but we're happy to highlight them for you.
And you did highlight them differently last year than you have in the past.
We had a different priority system, a lot more information, it was a lot more useful, I think.
Hopefully.
And operating budget impacts, and I think we ended up in a good spot, and we're happy to make additional changes as you require.
We have talked to them, we talked to them in department head meetings, specifically each of the directors, about providing the substantive narrative down at the bottom that provides the address on how it meets the council priorities and other things. And so I think we're going to watch for that too.
Yep.
And I think they'll be a lot more complete this year.
I would say from our perspective of staff, and I know various council members have said over the time, the incremental changes that have happened over the last couple of years have been very helpful. And I think with this other shift of having the department heads come earlier is going to continue to help us. And so thank you for working with us.
Okay. We will get that to you on the 1st of March. And so if you wanted to schedule your meetings shortly after that so that they could review the CIP as well as talking about upcoming budgets, you could do that. So we'll do that. Yes.
So I have two other questions. One is for Wayne. As far as budget direction, the Sustainability Committee had recommended a full-time sustainability coordinator, indicated there'd probably be some grants they could get and some cost savings. Is that something that you're going to make a recommendation on, or would you be looking to us to have a discussion about that?
Well, I mean, it's certainly in the mix along with, I mean, we'd be considering that as a supplemental request because it's net new to the organization. And so we'll be looking at that. If there is a strong sense from the council that that's something you'd like to see funded, that's an added important bit of data for us in helping the mayor make a decision about that. But we'll treat it like a supplemental request and treat it as we do all the other supplementals. Again, unless council has a strong sense that that should be a very high priority for us. And if that's the case, that's a data point that the mayor will consider in her decision.
The second question would be for you, John. We, a number of us on the council watched a video that I think it was originally sent by Don Jarvis, and Mr. Connect forwarded it, and it was talking about sort of financial sustainability of city budgets, and he was making the case that typical cities sort of borrow against the future in a sense, that we're not fully funding the costs for road repairs and things like that, and infrastructure, and sort of banking on growth down the road to sort of bail us out. Is that your sense of?
Well, I would say a couple things. First of all, I would like to see, I haven't seen the video, I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I'm interested in your take on it.
I think you're talking about structural deficits and such.
Yeah, it was the, what do you call it, the strong towns, the strong towns.
Which is basically a spiral down.
I do know that we've made huge steps in the right direction funding roads with the different things that we've done with the UTF and with the 1% transfer and with the increase the state just recently did with road taxes. But is it a struggle to balance the budget each year? Yes. But I'd like to see it, but I think if we wanted to adequately fund other areas, then we may need to be prepared to find ways to increase, to make some cuts or to do some increases in taxes and things to pay for those. But I don't think, having not seen the video yet, I think we are in a pretty good position because Provo hasn't been growing very dramatically. I mean, we've actually had very moderate growth, and areas like Lehigh and other areas that are experiencing significant growth, they have to be really careful about that because that growth is going to end at some point and they're going to be facing some difficulties. So one of the positives with Provo is that our growth has been low, but on the other hand, another thing that's really helped the city to be sustainable in recent years has been utility increases and the transfer that's associated with those. And at some point, those increases are going to hopefully level out some. And we want to be prepared that we're not in a bad position when that happens, where we're just dependent upon the transfer. But if you could send that to me or get to me, I'd love to watch it and then give you further feedback on it.
That'd be great.
Sean, off the top, there's really no departments that we're really underfunding, are there?
They would all argue they all are. That's
But yeah,
significantly underfunding?
I think that's an interpretation to be made by administration and council on if you want more out of something, they'd be happy to give it to you.
Probably the area we hear the very most is police, number one, and fire as well. But I think we still have made some steps in a good direction with the police department, and I think we're having some good discussions with them. But it's tough. It's just expensive, and based on the fact that we are experiencing little growth, and that it's just a challenge with increases in expenses versus what's happening with sales revenue. It's a challenge.
You might let them know that they need to show why we would need to increase it based on crime statistics and things like that.
Yeah, and again, I think our key focus has been with them to make the case from a metric perspective, right? Come in and say, I mean, the anecdotal things we hear are we're having more and more transients in the community, and I think there's a variety of causes for that, but they do tend to create a crime demand, law enforcement demand that is in excess of its proportionate share of change in the community. They're committing more crimes, or getting more fights, or whatever that might be, and so again, what we've kind of said is, okay, document, tell us about how that's working, and what additional cost there is, and how it's impacting existing service levels. So it's changing response time. Is it reducing our ability to enforce traffic so that we minimize accidents? So tell us what's happening with traffic accidents in our community, and just make your case from a data perspective that there's a demand.
Because nobody's more supportive of public safety than I am, but we need to see why.
We all are. Yeah, we want it to be right. And if there's a problem, and we can document it, and it's in hard data, then that makes it a whole lot easier to make the decision.
The other where I think we've been very supportive is from a technological standpoint, what we've done with the
body-worn
cameras and a whole ton of things we're doing.
I don't know anything they brought it to us that we haven't approved. Go ahead.
I think that's probably accurate.
True. But that does lead us into our next topic, which we want to talk a little bit about performance measures, and also some specific things that we could look at. One of the things that was talked about with the budget committee, and administration had some discussions, is maybe this year taking a couple of departments as samples and including in the budget documents some information. And so we've got a couple of ideas that we got from actually GFOA, which is an organization that we have our CAFR and our budget document reviewed by, came back with some recommendations, and we talked about a couple. So we want to just put some on the board and just have some discussions and get your feedback and thoughts. So Dustin?
So this is actually feedback from our GFOA review. So we get a review, it's reviewed by 3 independent reviewers, and they give us feedback on different aspects of our budget. And one area that we would like to push into the outstanding category is on our performance evaluation, performance metrics reporting. This is an example provided by one of the reviewers that said, this is an outstanding one. If you wanted to do outstanding, this is what you should do. This is from the village of Algonquin, Illinois, and it's kind of hard to tell, so I might be able to tell you, but this column is a department objective column, and then this is a strategy or a measure, and then the GFOA standard is to report last year's actual, current year progress, and then next year's target, but they've included the actual on the target and then 2 years of history. So what our hope is to actually use, we've provided a second example, and Kelsey, I don't know if you want to pull it up. This is for parks and recreation, but this is what we envision possibly might work for Provo as a way of reporting these performance metrics and including them in the budget document itself. What I would think is this priority over here would end up being those 4 that we've discussed today, those high-level aspects, potentially council priorities or other areas as they apply, but this higher priority and then a department level goal that they have. These are actual goals that the department has, right? And these are actual measures that our police department reports on. And then including this data is just for discussion purposes.
Numbers aren't real.
Yeah, the numbers aren't real. They're close, but this is just to give you an idea of reporting if this was for the 2019 budget, 2017's actual numbers, the current and then target numbers for 2018, and then the target for next fiscal year, which we would be budgeting for. So we kind of want to get your feedback on if we were to include this for some of the specific departments. For instance, this, I think we could come up with this chart exactly for police. Or what is it that you want over here? Or what do you feel is the best fit for this column for this reporting? Our hope is that this would help us fit with our GFOA standard and also help address the budgeting to priorities, or budgeting for outcomes at least. For the council.
It could be out of the 4 priorities, there's one that really applies specifically to police, okay? That one's here, and then they align the goals that support those, and it could provide some good measures. And so, don't know if this is helpful. I'd also be interested in, Larry, your thoughts, and see if this gets us closer to what we're talking about. But this is something that we could start. Of course, it would be helpful if we had the priorities to go with it, but we could start it in this budget period, at least for a couple of departments.
So just to clarify, in this example, you'd be setting a goal that these particular types of crimes are not going to increase. So the target means we want to have that number or less?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Change those around. We had actually 9,000 burglaries, and we're at 45, and
So-
we're hoping to get 9,000 burglaries.
The numbers don't mean anything.
Numbers don't mean anything, and I think this would be a good point of discussion with department directors when you're reviewing the budgets with them of, well, what happened to this number? Why is this your goal? And they could talk about, well, here's the realities. Maybe the transients, maybe their goal is actually higher than this one, but lower than this one, you know, and they're adjusting based on reality. And there's probably a lot of moving parts to why these numbers might change. And I think generate meaningful discussion. A lot of departments, and I think that's what, I don't know if you've heard much about the discussions around budgeting for priorities in the past, but a lot of departments are already tracking their own kind of, these are benchmarks or other performance measures, and a lot of them use them for the internal review. I know that energy does that for their energy board, and police reports a lot of their own statistics. Fire has a number of statistics, customer service has a number of statistics.
I think
that these
really
things
helpful.
already exist,
Yeah.
but they don't always relate at this level. And if we can concisely report that to you, I think we can generate the meaningful discussion of, well, these dollars went to do these
See,
things.
if this was zoning enforcement, for example, okay, and we talked earlier today about the progress that we've made with zoning enforcement, wouldn't it be awesome to see the numbers support that and be able to show that you've been making
Anything
progress?
that they could do when they come to talk to us, I think would be so helpful.
Absolutely. This gets me excited. This is what I think is the first step towards budgeting for outcomes and in a non-politicized just metrics. Even if we never get to budgeting for outcomes, we have to have these metrics. Some of them exist, some departments use it to varying levels. We need to get a systematic way, and so if we can take a baby step, and even for just a couple of departments or whatever, absolutely. I'm so supportive of this.
George?
I like it too. I just wonder about things like reporting rates that really throw a monkey in the monkey wrench, throw a wrench in the. Yeah. I don't know my idiomatic expression. But it seems
Wait
to
till
me,
you get to acronyms.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me if you're tracking, domestic violence, right? And you say, well, we've had fewer reports of domestic violence. You don't really know that domestic violence isn't happening.
That's true.
So I mean, you're probably going to have some categories here where the number is a little bit misleading.
Yep.
It's creating the impression of progress when in fact there might be other explanations.
And I think once we have something, we can start to have that discussion on which measures are the better measures, and we can iterate from there. I think on as we have something to respond to.
I just wouldn't want to be in a position of saying, oh, well, we no longer need to fund that because the rate has gone down or something like
And
that.
I think
when
the
we actually
department
don't
directors
know.
would be hesitant to jump on board with that type of model, because there's going to be a lot of other things that are going to affect these types of measures. And I think our hope would be that this is a communication tool more than a means for making significant changes to the budget.
And one of the hesitancies of the directors in this kind of approach is that the council may see some of these numbers and make some actions that they know from a professional perspective wouldn't be the right thing to do. And so that's why we just need to help build that trust and seek their input from the information as well, so we're making good decisions.
So, you got me thinking about the number of complaints may not really correlate with how much is going on out there in the way of abuse or whatever. But if we worked with those departments or those organizations that we actually help fund, and we require them to give us statistics like how many in women and children's shelter, how many clients were from Provo in this last year. And so we can actually see by how many they're treating and handling if the number is going down regardless of the number of complaints.
So these are just tools to help.
Yep.
Yeah.
Larry, do you have a comment?
I did. I want to echo the positive feedback you've gotten from the council. I think this is a great step. One suggestion I would make is that obviously the police department tracks an awful lot more than just those.
This is just a couple of examples.
But you may not want to report all of them to the council, but the department heads need to be the ones to say, these are the ones we want the council to see.
Okay, I think that's good. Shouldn't just be a laundry list of everything that they show.
I mean, because from an operational standpoint, Wayne and the department heads are going to be paying a lot more attention to a lot more detail than the council necessarily is going to be able to digest in looking at the big picture. But so I think it's really important that the department heads are actively involved in deciding how to tell their story, and which metrics should we be using.
And vice versa, the council can suggest, well, this is a priority, we've been hearing this from our constituents, would you please add?
That's part of the conversation.
Yep.
Okay, well, we will proceed then. What we're going to try to do is pick a couple departments that are already collecting data, so that there won't be really disruptive with this short notice, and then also as we try this out, but that's going to be our plan, and we'll work with administration in determining who those departments will be, but we'll have that as part of the budget. So.
And will you work also with Cliff on having them come to present to the council so that we're not putting an undue burden on somebody that hasn't maybe got this, but if you tell us the ones that are actually doing this and working on it, those are things that I'm sure the council would like to see.
Okay.
Maybe we can discuss that in department directors meeting.
Cool. Yeah, we can do that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're done. We're going to assume that, what's the word we use?
By unanimous consent, we're adjourning.
Seeing no objections. We'll get this figured out. But we'll just say we're adjourned on unanimous consent.
Thank you.